We open inside the maze of Deluk. A massive containment unit lies shattered. A masked warrior questions his opponent's overwhelming strength, but then realizes the weakness lies in his current body. He faces the ruler of the maze, the beast known as Deluk. Its eyes glow with raw, untamed power. The warrior tightens his grip on his bloodied sword. He faces the beast, and his internal monologue is not exactly optimistic. The monster roars, ready to end this fight. All the warrior can do is brace for impact. The ruler of the maze brings down its glowing axe. A furious roar echoes with the swing. The warrior can only raise his small shield in defense. He digs his feet into the earth, preparing for the worst. The impact is immense, cracking the very ground. He's launched into the sky, completely overpowered. But mid-flight, he rights himself, sword in hand, and charges back down at the beast below. Guess he's not a fan of strategic retreats. His focus is absolute, his will unbroken. He clashes with Deluk in a flash of light. The beast lets out a final agonizing roar. Its massive axe clatters to the blood-soaked ground, and the warrior stands victorious over the fallen ruler. Deluk stares up, its reign finally at an end. But our hero knew this was coming all along. He recalls the monster's one critical weakness, a fatal piece of trivia the previous challengers clearly missed. They all aimed for the left, where a heart should be. The reason he knows this is that he's killed Deluk 1,000 times before. His experience in this place runs deeper than anyone knows. He steps past the remains of those who failed before him. His gaze falls upon the very thing Deluk was guarding. A colossal set of doors sealed for an eternity. Light spills through the cracks as they begin to open, and he steps through into the unknown. His foot lands not on stone, but on a sea of gold. He takes it all in, completely unsurprised. A treasure room beyond any king's wildest dreams. Guess the monster had a pretty good retirement plan, but his eyes are drawn to a single item on the throne, a small dagger, the final prize he's been seeking. He sits upon the throne, the prize in hand, but his internal monologue is less than celebratory. Elsewhere, in a quiet tavern, rumors begin to spread that the violent Minotaur has finally been defeated. The news reaches the very man who accomplished the feat. A waiter brings him his food, striking up a conversation. He asks the cloaked adventurer where he's from. The warrior gives a one-word answer, Aram. A name that shocks the server, who recalls the village that disappeared. But our hero isn't interested in sharing his tragic backstory. The waiter quickly apologizes, explaining he was just curious. But our hero just keeps eating, completely unfazed. He's cut all ties with that past, a stranger to his own history. The scene shifts to another man, cloaked and bloodied. His face is a mask of fury and pain. He collapses to the ground, clutching his head in agony. He stares at the blood on his hands, confused. A voice calls out, snapping him back to reality. He sees armored guards rushing past, shouting in a panic. And his first thought is that he's stumbled onto a movie set. Guess he's not from around here. He lets out a pained gasp, still trying to process what's happening. Suddenly, a memory flashes through his mind. Of a brutal, overwhelming force. The silhouette of a monstrous wolf fills his vision. He remembers the creature responsible, a bipedal wolf monster, and the bodies of the guards it left in its wake. He recognizes their armor. They're from the Banta Black Ring. A flood of memories assaults him, voices calling out a name, Hans. Guess his brain is finally rebooting. The chaos subsides and he recalls the names of the fallen. He's starting to understand where he is and what just happened. He remembers the starting point of the Banta Black Ring, Aram Village. The wolf monster sniffs the air, its eyes glowing with malice. But a sudden blow lands squarely across its face, and Hans realizes the gravity of his situation. The beast lunges, and he knows this could be the end. He tries to steady his nerves to remain calm, which is a pretty tall order right now. The monster roars, its power overwhelming. Its massive claws are ready to tear him apart. But Hans manages to block the strike just in time. But the force of the blow sends him reeling. He hits the ground hard, his weapon shattered. He wonders if this is how his story ends. The beast slowly approaches its fallen prey. Its eyes burn with a cold, victorious light. But something inside Hans refuses to give up. He tries to force his paralyzed body to move, begging his limbs to just listen for once. Guess they're not on speaking terms right now. The monster looms over him, ready for the final strike. But a voice suddenly cries out his name. A red-haired warrior leaps into the fray, intercepting the beast. He swings a massive polearm with incredible force. He stands guard over Hans, asking if he's all right. But he's less than impressed with Hans's current condition. He yells at him to get up and fight. The wolf monster roars, clearly not a fan of being ignored. The warrior turns back, furious at the interruption. Guess he takes his motivational speeches very seriously. He raises his shield just in time to block a vicious strike. The beast's own attack leaves it wounded, and the warrior prepares to deliver a fatal blow. The warrior drives his weapon deep into the beast's chest. All around them, the village of Aram burns. With the monster defeated, he turns his attention back to Hans. He asks the boy how long he plans to just sit there. But the response he gets is completely unexpected. "I'm not Hans." The warrior dismisses it as battle shock, telling him to make himself useful. He tells him to go arm the villagers instead of being a burden. But the boy's eyes are clear, his mind elsewhere. The warrior's patience finally runs out. Guess he's not the ask nicely type. And our hero finally understands he's in the body of a boy named Hans. He's still the same warrior on the inside. He lets out a slow, thoughtful breath. A wild idea begins to form in his mind. He remembers the monsters responsible, the Wolfrakon, and he knows their primary target was the village storage. He realizes this isn't just a random attack, it's a tutorial. A sudden, shocking realization hits him. This is the starting point for the game's hero, Cadiz. Guess he's just an NPC in someone else's story. And with that knowledge, he springs into action. His focus is absolute, a plan already in motion. He catches his breath, the plan taking shape. A small, confident smile spreads across his face. He knows exactly where he needs to go. The village stables. Inside, he scans the area, looking for something specific. He braces himself for what he's about to do. His eyes land on a pile of fresh animal droppings. Guess desperate times call for desperate perfumes. He knows he needs to mask his human scent from the monsters. And this is certainly no time to be picky about the method. He begins rubbing the filth all over his body. As a distant scream echoes, he remains completely focused. He knows he can't save the villagers, so he ignores their desperate cries for help. His focus remains fixed on the world outside. Suddenly, he spots a figure in the distance. He watches from the stables as the battle rages on, and a grin spreads across his face. The main event has arrived. The true playable character of this story, the hero known as Cadiz. And with the hero comes the tutorial's final boss. The king of the Wolfrakons, Silvermane Durkin. The hero Cadiz faces off against the Wolfrakon king. He leaps into the air, blade ready for the kill. His masked gaze is locked onto his target, but his attack is effortlessly blocked, his weapon shattering. Hans can only watch in utter disbelief. The game's protagonist lies defeated on the ground, but Hans refuses to accept this outcome, clinging to the logic of a game. He believes the hero will just respawn. Guess he's taking the whole "it's just a game" thing a bit too literally. But on the battlefield, the hero remains still. And back in the stables, Hans tries to keep his composure. His hands clench into a tight, bloodied fist. He strikes his own face, trying to clear his head. He knows he has one last chance to act. All around him, the village continues to burn. The hero's body lies still on the blood-soaked ground. He realizes he has to do something himself. Guess the NPC is tired of waiting for a patch. He approaches the fallen hero's body and takes up the blade, recalling his time playing as Cadiz. A flood of memories from the game fills his mind, and now he must take the hero's place. The hero's sword now glows in his hand. He makes his way to the top of a watchtower. His gaze is fixed, the moon his only witness. He stands above the chaos, a lone figure against the flames. Taking his position at the very edge, he briefly wonders if this is the right call, but his presence is quickly noticed by the Wolfrakon king. With no other choice, he prepares to jump. Guess gravity is his new best friend. The beast turns, revealing a glowing core in its shoulder. Hans tightens his grip, ready to end this. He leaps from the roof, sword held steady, plummeting towards the chaos below. His target, the Wolfrakon king. A furious battle cry escapes his lips. The blade finds its mark, sinking deep into the beast's skull. The monster lets out a deafening roar of agony, but Hans isn't done yet, driving the sword even deeper. The beast thrashes wildly, trying to throw him off. Guess it's not a fan of the new head accessory. He holds on with all his might, cursing the creature. But the Wolfrakon king turns, a strange question on its lips. Hans screams in fury, refusing to let go. The beast's eye widens in a moment of clarity. It slams its paw into the ground, mustering its strength. The Wolfrakon king is brought to its knees, but not defeated. Hans raises the glowing sword for another strike. But the beast retaliates with a lightning-fast swipe, sending Hans crashing through a nearby wall. He lies on the ground, wondering if his attack wasn't enough. Guess the boss has a second health bar. The monster stumbles, clutching its wounded head. Its eyes burn with renewed rage, ready for round 2. But just as the beast prepares to attack, a voice cuts through the chaos. A figure lands with the force of a meteor. It's the red-haired warrior, furious that the Wolfricon king isn't at the warehouse. He dives in, sword first, aiming for the beast's head. His blade sinks deep into the monster's shoulder. His eyes burn with an unyielding fury. But the Wolfricon king easily swats him aside. Guess he's not a fan of surprise parties. Hans watches as his unexpected backup is sent flying. The warrior lands hard, questioning why Hans isn't running like he usually does. He asks why he's fighting a battle he can't possibly win. A flashback reveals the warrior once told Hans to live, but the memory is filled with weariness and loss. He recalls a promise made over a fallen friend. The younger Hans had accused him of cowardice, but the warrior only wanted to grow stronger. A promise made at a lonely grave. Guess some memories are better left buried. But our hero shatters the memory, declaring he is not Hans. His grip on the hero's sword tightens. A strange power envelops him, his will focused on one thing: survival. And he launches himself back at the Wolfricon king. He realizes the beast is already critically wounded, and suddenly he can see its movements with perfect clarity. He dodges a swipe with impossible speed. The hero's power flows through him, guiding his body. He flips over the beast's head, preparing to strike, and brings the blade down in a flash of golden light. The monster roars, caught completely off guard. Guess it didn't expect the NPC to have a DLC power-up. Hans lands gracefully, the attack complete. He stands his ground, waiting for the result. A deep wound appears across the Wolfricon king's chest. The final blow lands, a spray of crimson, and a wild, triumphant laugh escapes his lips. The Wolfricon king lies defeated, its reign over. The scene shifts, the chaos of battle fading away, and Hans collapses onto a bed, utterly spent. Guess even NPCs need a long rest. He tries to process everything that's happened. He recalls the dungeon he conquered in his old life, and how it perfectly matched the game he once played. He's trapped in the body of a simple villager, realizing he's been transported into the game itself. But as he thinks it over, he realizes he wasn't sent here with nothing. He somehow possesses the memories and skills of the hero, Cadiz. He tries to summon a status window but gets no response. Guess the user interface is a bit buggy. A few days pass as the village begins to recover. Hans spends his time gathering information and confirms that this world is just like the game he knew. If this is truly the world of Banta Black Ring, then other heroes must exist. He dons a familiar mask, his first objective clear. His target is another hero, a man named Pavel's Codvan. And conveniently, they're staying at the very same inn. He opens the door to his room, only to bump right into his target. The man is none other than the hero, Pavel's Codvan. Hans is taken aback, not expecting such a clumsy first meeting. He quickly apologizes by offering to treat the man to a meal. Pavel's graciously accepts, clearly not one to turn down free food. The two sit down to eat, with Pavel's digging in immediately. He seems to be enjoying the unexpected hospitality. Guess bumping into people is a great way to make friends. Pavel's asks if Hans is interested in joining a major monster hunt, but Hans cuts straight to the point, admitting his real interest is Pavel's. The hero's friendly demeanor vanishes, replaced by a sharp, calculating gaze. Pavel's taps his fork, his expression unreadable. He points out that everyone else has already left for the hunt. He smirks, suggesting the other hunters are walking into a trap. He assumes Hans is just as greedy as he is, but Hans clarifies that money isn't his goal. He's here to find a partner strong enough to take down a beast called Antro. He approaches the counter to pay for his stay, and drops a hefty sum of gold, catching Pavel's attention. Guess our boy saved up his allowance. The hero's eyes light up, realizing Hans is wealthier than he looks. Pavel says he prefers to work alone, but offers a challenge. Their journey takes them to a desolate, fog-covered mountain range. They venture deep into a dark forest, with Hans following his new guide. Hans's goal isn't to be a hero or save the world. He just wants to find a safe place where he can survive. And he believes Pavel's is the perfect shield to hide behind. After all, Pavel's is a master of traps and an easy difficulty character. And easy means a higher chance of not dying. Guess he's playing on story mode. Pavel's confirms their target is near, wishing him luck. Hans puts all his trust in the hero's abilities, and they come face to face with the monstrous Antro. Hans decides to just sit back and watch the show. Guess he brought snacks. Meanwhile, Pavel's leaps into action against the colossal beast. His focus is absolute, his crossbow aimed and ready. He fires a single precise bolt straight at the monster's eye. But he's forced to dodge as a massive branch swings his way. He calculates it will take 3 shots to bring the creature down, and unleashes a rapid volley of bolts at its face. But the monster seems completely unfazed by the attack. A massive branch whips around, knocking him from his perch. As he falls, he laments the high cost of his equipment. Hans recalls an item from the game, the Stone of Red Flowers, an explosive gem that he realizes Pavels is also using. The hero tosses the glowing stone to the ground below. He lands gracefully, his crossbow already aimed, and fires a single bolt straight down. The arrow strikes the stone, splitting it perfectly in two. A strange energy begins to pulse from within the fragments. It unleashes a volley of homing projectiles at the beast. Guess this hero really knows his inventory. The monster can only watch as the attack closes in, and the entire area is consumed by a massive explosion. Hans watches the aftermath, his thoughts on Pavels. Through the smoke, a single red eye still burns. He admits the hero's power is even greater than he expected. But as the dust settles, the monster is still standing. Pavel stares, his confidence beginning to crack. His surprise quickly turns to disbelief, and then to outright panic. His ultimate attack wasn't enough to finish it. Guess that expensive gear didn't come with a warranty. The beast's face splits into a horrifying grin, and it raises its massive arm for a final, crushing blow. The monster's arm crashes down with devastating force, and just like that, the popcorn show is officially over. Hans recalls how the game's first hero, Kadiz, also fell, and now Pavels, who seemed so flawless, has been defeated just as easily. It seems nothing in this world is going according to plan. With the hero gone, he knows he has to step in himself. He dodges a wild swing from the enraged beast, but even in this chaos, he sees an opportunity. He knows he'll need two more things to guarantee victory. First, he needs Pavels' bag and the Stone of Red Flowers inside. He turns, his plan already in motion. A massive limb cuts through the air. But Hans is already moving, his second goal in mind. He needs to acquire Pavels' special ability. Guess looting your fallen comrades is a valid strategy here. The monster raises its arm, its core glowing with fury. Its empty gaze fixes on the lone warrior. Hans dodges a barrage of spikes erupting from the earth. The creature's massive form blots out the sky, and he prepares to face the towering beast head-on. The beast lets out a deafening sonic blast. The force of the scream makes it difficult to advance. He struggles to even get close to the monster, so he sheathes his sword, changing his approach. But he has another trick up his sleeve. He channels the power of a different swordsmanship style and unleashes a blindingly fast attack. The strike lands true, hitting the beast's arm. The creature's jaw hangs open in shock. Even Hans admits that's a pretty unsettling sight. The beast lets out a furious, earth-shaking roar. He recalls the key to defeating Antro is destroying its core, a weakness most adventurers miss before falling to despair. But Hans knows this monster's secret. He knows its one critical flaw. The beast brings its massive arms crashing down. But Hans moves like a flash of light, dodging the blow. He runs straight up the creature's limb. Guess taking the stairs was out of the question. He knew its attack patterns from the game, and he has to strike before it unleashes its sonic scream. He soars through the air, a golden blur. His target is the monster's massive head. The impact shatters the stone-like flesh, sending a deep crack across its face. But he's not done, using the opening to swing below. Guess he's a fan of dramatic entrances. He draws another blade, his plan far from over. He tosses Pavels' bag into the air and slices it open, releasing the red stones. The beast can only watch, its rage building. The stones activate, homing in on their one true target. The beast's core glows, a perfect target for the incoming attack. And Hans delivers one final defiant gesture. Guess he's not a fan of polite goodbyes. The stones detonate in a blinding, fiery vortex. But through the smoke, the monster still stands. Much to Hans's disbelief, he feels a strange new power coursing through his veins. He somehow inherited Kadiz's swordsmanship and Pavels' throwing ability. It seems he can absorb the skills of the fallen heroes. With the battle won, he walks away from the carnage alone. But he rejects this newfound power, refusing to become a hero. He turns his back on that path, his resolve set in stone. His next destination is Malik Castle, but a mid-boss stands in his way. A fearsome foe known as Hommel, the Martyr of Darkness. Without Pavels, he knows he'll need a special tool to win this fight. His search brings him to the bustling Calyx village. The city seems peaceful, a stark contrast to his mission. He makes his way through the quiet back alleys. He approaches a burly guard, recalling a key piece of information. He looks up at the man, ready to test his theory, and gives the secret password, Knell of Wisdom. Guess it's not open sesame. The guard's smirk confirms he's in the right place. He descends into the city's hidden underbelly, confident that he can find the tool he needs in this place. Welcome to the Owl Nest, an underground broker's office. He walks through the shadowy marketplace with purpose. But his presence doesn't go unnoticed for long. A woman with striking purple eyes takes an interest in him. She offers to help the newcomer, but Hans bluntly refuses. His strange response leaves her completely baffled. "Guess I'm used to it" isn't a great conversation starter. He recalls how newbies would come here to lower the game's difficulty, a brief flash of a time when he was just another player in the system. He finds what he's looking for in a dark cell. A young girl, his chosen unique tool. She looks up, her red eyes filled with fear. With his new companion, he leaves the city behind. They walk out of the Calyx village north gate. Hans lets out a weary sigh. The journey ahead long. He glances back at the girl he just purchased. She seems understandably uncomfortable around him. "Guess I'm your new owner" isn't a great icebreaker, but he reminds himself she is only a temporary asset. Nothing more and nothing less. He watches as a new group arrives at the gate. He recognizes the banner of the Red Crocodile Teeth industry. And the warrior accompanying them, a man named Gerbier. He wields the legendary Vermilion sword. Guess subtlety isn't his strong suit. Hans notes that the warrior has grown stronger since the game. The man makes his way through the crowd with his cargo. But thanks to his game knowledge, Hans knows their history, and he calls out to his new companion Lemelin. The girl flinches, surprised to be addressed by name. He tells her to keep up, as their journey is far from over. They travel through a barren wasteland, the girl following behind. He explains her simple yet terrifying purpose: to draw the attention of any monsters they encounter. In other words, she's nothing more than bait, but he hopes it won't come to that. Guess he has a heart after all. Their path leads them to a valley of ruins and bones. The sight leaves Lemelin frozen in absolute terror, but Hans simply tells her to follow him. He offers her a small blade for protection, and she takes a hesitant step forward into the darkness. He demonstrates a strange power, lifting her with a single arm. She wipes away a tear, trying to make sense of it all, but her fear gives way to confusion, and then to outright shock. He offers her a special fruit that can temporarily remove her scent. She looks relieved, clearly preferring this to his last method. He knows it's best to avoid any unnecessary problems. As night falls, the full moon watches over their journey. They venture deeper into the ancient, crumbling ruins. Lemelin looks back at him, trying to find the words to speak. He looks up at the crumbling walls of the ancient fortress. He knows that in this world, the only thing he can truly believe in is not the strength of men, but the reality of his situation. After all, he watched two powerful heroes fall so easily. He has to stay open to all possibilities as the dead begin to rise. And it seems the welcoming committee is already here. Their destination, Malik Castle, looms in the distance, but its grounds are patrolled by a ruthless skeletal army. Their leader plants his staff, claiming the territory. The previous challengers are swiftly defeated, leaving only the boss, Hommel. The Martyr of Darkness, Hommel, stands ready. Hans watches as even the mighty Gerbier falls. He concludes that he'll have to handle this himself. He turns to Lemelin, telling her it's time to move. She nervously asks if he's serious about his plan. His tone leaves absolutely no room for argument. The girl can only tremble in fear. He tells her to run for her life, and drops a few coins into her hand as payment. A payment so large it leaves her completely stunned. Guess hazard pay in this world is pretty decent. Lemelin is overwhelmed, asking if this is truly all he wants from her. But Hans simply hands her a special stick, a lure for the undead. He strikes it against his gauntlet, creating a single spark. The stick ignites as he tells her to take it and live her own life. She's confused, reminding him of the contract that binds her. But he reveals he already canceled it before they even arrived. Guess he's not a fan of paperwork. She takes the torch, her mind reeling from this sudden act of kindness. He assures her it's the truth as they look out over the battlefield. With one final command, he tells her to run, and he drops another torch, signaling the start of his plan. Lemelin ignites the torches, ready to play her part. She holds them high, a beacon in the darkness, and with a defiant cry she draws their attention. The Martyr of Darkness, Hommel, lets out a silent command. He points a bony finger, ordering his minions to attack. The girl's bravery falters as the entire army turns on her. Guess being the center of attention isn't always fun. She turns and runs, leading the undead on a wild chase. But Hans isn't worried in the slightest. He knows Lemelin's unique nature will keep her safe. And with the army distracted, he makes his move on the boss. Hommel turns his gaze, his blue eyes burning, and Hans throws one of Pavel's parting gifts. Guess looting really does pay off. The explosive stone detonates right in the boss's face. He takes stock of the situation. Only 3 guards remain. He'd expected more, but he's not about to complain. He stands ready to face the last of Hommel's minions. Meanwhile, Lemelin continues to play her part. Running for her life through the ruined castle, she leads the undead army down a narrow path. Following Hans's instructions to the letter, she runs with everything she has, remembering the plan, weaving through the skeletal army like a fiery ghost. Her eyes lock onto the north gate, her only way out, and she makes it across the line to safety. She catches her breath, the terror finally subsiding. The undead stop at the gate, just as he said they would. Guess skeletons respect property lines, but her relief is quickly replaced by a painful realization. She thinks of the red stigma that marks her as a tool. Her hand goes to a small necklace she wears. She fulfilled her contract, her role as bait now complete. She collapses to the ground, convinced this was the end, but tears of relief fall as she realizes he told the truth. For the first time in her life, she is finally free. Meanwhile, Hans faces the last of Hommel's guards. He effortlessly parries the skeleton's attack and dispatches it with a single, clean strike. He remembers the dagger Pavels was so fond of, and channels the hero's superhuman throwing ability. Guess that skill transfer has some serious perks. The blade flies through the air with impossible speed, and finds its mark with deadly precision. He knows the dagger wasn't enough to finish it, but a single moment of hesitation is all he needs. He channels the power of the fallen warrior Gerbier. Guess it's time to try out the classics. He leaps into the air with a massive greatsword, and brings it down with devastating force. The blade feels impossibly light in his hands. He realizes he's also absorbed Gerbier's raw strength. He easily dodges the final guard's attack, and cuts the last minion down with a single swing. With the small fries out of the way, it's time for the main event. Hans stares down the Martyr of Darkness, completely unfazed. Under the pale moonlight, the final battle begins. Hommel brings down his massive mace with terrifying force. But Hans charges forward, confident in his borrowed power. He knows he has to stop the boss's next move. The mace descends, a blur of destructive energy. He realizes he can't dodge this one, and raises his sword to meet the blow head-on. The impact sends his weapon flying from his grasp, and Hans is thrown across the battlefield like a rag doll. Guess that borrowed power has its limits. He struggles to recover, but Hommel is already on the move. The Martyr of Darkness brings its mace down once more, unleashing a devastating wave of pure energy. The attack carves a path of destruction through the castle grounds. Hans is left kneeling in the aftermath, barely holding on. His grip tightens on the hilt of his shattered sword. The force of the blow leaves him battered and broken. He realizes this body can't handle the strain of the fight. Guess being an NPC has its downsides. Without a proper weapon, Gerbier's powerful swordsmanship is useless. And for the first time, he begins to question his own reckless plan. He realizes his obsession with using abilities was a mistake. His weapon is broken and his body is in terrible shape, but he dismisses the setback with a crack of his neck. A new resolve burns in his eyes as he returns to his original plan. He knows every one of the boss's attacks is lethal, and sprints back into the fray. The Martyr of Darkness prepares to strike again. Its massive weapon looms over our hero. Guess round 2 is officially on. But Hans plants his foot, changing his approach. He knows if he can just take away its balance. He just needs to create an opening. He tosses another explosive stone right at its feet. The blast is just enough to stagger the massive skeleton. He knows its overwhelming strength is now useless. So he pulls out another strange item from his inventory and drops a small chess piece right onto the boss's head. Guess it's time for a checkmate. The item dissolves, covering the skeleton in a strange liquid. The substance weakens its grip, forcing it to drop its weapon. The Martyr of Darkness can only stare in confusion, and Hans reveals his next trick. A long, heavy chain. He reveals the chain is soaked in specially prepared holy water, a little something he knew would be effective on the undead. The chain wraps around Hommel's head, a perfect snare. He pulls it tight, knowing the core is right inside its skull. If he can just break that core, the fight is over. He uses the chain to climb onto the boss's shoulders. Guess he's going for a piggyback ride. He raises a small, glowing vial high above his head and drives it straight down into the creature's skull. The bone cracks, revealing the glowing blue core within. But the wound begins to heal almost instantly, powered by the core itself. But Hans was prepared for this exact scenario. He reveals he brought plenty of holy water for the occasion. Guess he's a big spender when it comes to boss fights. And he pours another vial directly into the wound, right onto the exposed, glowing core. The holy water dissolves the core from the inside out. The Martyr of Darkness grabs him in a final desperate act. But Hans knows its struggles are futile. He stands firm, ready to deliver the final blow. With another vial at the ready, he prepares to end this. The creature's skull shatters as its core finally gives out. With the battle over, Hans collapses beside the fallen boss. The Martyr of Darkness is finally still, its reign at an end. But Hans can't help but feel a sense of frustrating déjà vu. He recalls the heroes whose powers he's been borrowing, and begins to question if this path is the right one. A new resolve hardens in his weary eyes, but his thoughts are interrupted by Lemelin, holding out his mask. The scene shifts, and Hans now stands alone in a new, desolate land. He looks out at the next fortress on his path, clearly unenthused, and clutches his arm, dealing with a familiar, painful side effect. Guess those borrowed powers come with some serious late fees. His eyes narrow with a familiar frustration. He tells Lemelin to take off the helmet. She quietly obeys, revealing her face, and Hans wonders how he ended up with a sidekick. The scene shifts to another night under a full moon. They've arrived at yet another crumbling fortress. He asks why she came back when her contract was over. But the side effects of his borrowed power suddenly kick in, and their quiet moment is interrupted by a new arrival. Guess the neighborhood watch is pretty serious around here. Lemelin's fear is replaced by concern for Hans. His gear lies discarded on the rooftop tiles. Lemelin tends to his wounds, her concern clear. He puts his shirt back on, his body wrapped in bandages. He thanks her for the help, then tells her to leave. But the girl simply shakes her head, refusing to go. Hans is left completely baffled by her response. He offers her more gold, assuming that's the issue. But she just shakes her head again, unimpressed. Guess money can't buy everything after all. He asks what else she could possibly want from him, and for the third time she silently refuses to budge. His gaze hardens, his patience worn thin. He finally asks her what it is she truly wants. And so their journey continues into the unknown. He sets a brisk pace, his mind already on the next objective. But he can feel her eyes following his every move. He stops to rest, the pain from his borrowed powers returning. His frustration is met with her silent, unwavering concern. She reaches out, refusing to let him push her away again. Guess she's not taking no for an answer this time. By the fire, she finally rests, using his lap as a pillow. And for the first time, she looks completely at peace. A new day dawns as their journey continues. They finally arrive at the Alban Citadel. A simple wooden sign marks their destination, but Hans knows bringing her inside will only cause problems. To him, she's become nothing more than a burden. Guess the warm fuzzies from freeing her didn't last long. He finally turns, asking why she's still following him. She quietly admits she just wants to stay by his side, a response that leaves Hans completely baffled. She explains that's the very reason she stays. Because he was the first person who didn't hurt her. He asks what more there is to her reasoning. She tearfully admits she just doesn't want to die. Their journey comes to a halt on a desolate cliffside. Hans asks if she really thinks he's a safe bet, pointing to the bandages that prove he's a walking liability. But she knows her chances are even worse on her own. He reminds her of the gold he gave her to start over. She explains that without a protector, she'd just be a target. Guess a bag of gold doesn't come with a security detail. His patience finally snaps, questioning her logic. Lemelin just looks down, unable to argue any further. He tells himself she's not his responsibility. But he knows that for her, he's the safest bet. He recalls her people, the piebalds, are highly sought after. If left alone, she'd likely be captured all over again. And he admits she was at least useful as bait. Lemelin can only look down, clutching the helmet he gave her. As he walks away, she follows without a word. He finally relents with a weary sigh. He tells her to guard the helmet or he'll leave her behind. Guess that's his version of a welcome basket. But his harsh words bring tears of relief to her eyes.
She agrees with a bright, relieved smile.
And so, their journey together officially begins. Their destination, the Alban Citadel, Pistanze. But the city's back alleys are filled with the sick and dying. Hans makes his way to a small, secluded pharmacy. He's here to pick up a special commission. But the alchemist tells him to be patient. She reminds him they're still missing a key ingredient, and that she's the only one who can heal his damaged arm. She then tells him to lighten up a bit. Guess she has a thing for the strong, silent, and heavily bandaged type. But Hans cuts her off, his patience worn thin. He threatens to silence her permanently. Nearby, a skeleton stands guard, completely unbothered. The alchemist just smirks, intrigued by his fiery personality. Her mind drifts back to another recent customer, a young man who arrived with a familiar-looking girl. She recalls her surprise at seeing the two strangers. She had questioned how they found her hidden shop, and why they were so desperate for a healing elixir. Back in the present, Hans asks for her impression of that man. He questions if her opinion of the man even matters. The alchemist dismisses the thought, admitting it's not. As she gets back to work, Lemelin waits patiently in the corner. Her eyes wander across the strange, macabre decorations. The alchemist opens a wooden box, revealing her wares. She asks how many of the healing elixirs he needs. He asks for 10, but she reminds him of the high price. but Hans assures her he can afford them and will pay what they're worth. Guess that hero loot is finally coming in handy. She smirks, naming an exorbitant price of 10 gold coins, a price that leaves Hans completely speechless. But Hans just smirks, upping his order to 15 bottles. He knows he's overpaying, but it's a calculated move. And he places the gold on the counter without a second thought. It's all part of his plan to raise her affinity, just like in the game. He then turns to Lemelin, asking for the loot from their last boss fight. Lemelin presents the item to the curious alchemist, a bag filled with the ashes of the Martyr of Darkness. The alchemist recognizes the rare ingredient, her interest clearly piqued, and Hans notes his plan is working even faster than he expected. Guess she's a fan of rare monster parts. She offers to craft 3 special items with the ashes he's provided. She offers to make more, but warns him it will come at a price. Hans doesn't care, downing the elixir without a second thought. A strange green energy flows through him as the potion takes effect. He admits the taste is absolutely terrible. Guess healing doesn't come in cherry flavor, but he can't deny its effectiveness, feeling his strength return. The alchemist then asks about Lemelin, and Hans immediately offers to give her away. The girl's face falls at his casual, heartless words, but the alchemist politely declines the offer. Hans tries to downplay their connection, insisting they've only just met, but she just smiles, suggesting their meeting was fated all along. With their business concluded, they walk along the citadel walls. They make their way down a winding stone staircase. They stop to look out over the vast, peaceful landscape. Lemelin is captivated by the beautiful sunrise. But Hans casually mentions a monster army is coming next week. Guess he's a real ray of sunshine. Her peaceful moment is instantly shattered by the news. He recalls the hero who was supposed to protect this place. But with that hero dead, the citadel is left defenseless. His gaze is sharp, analyzing the situation. He's here to see how this place will survive without a hero. He makes his way through the city's bustling streets. His destination is a local tavern. Inside, a bounty hunter boasts about his future success. He brags about capturing a minion of a legendary witch, but his claims are met with skepticism from the other patrons. The friendly banter quickly escalates into a challenge. A cloaked figure watches the chaos, completely unimpressed. Guess tavern brawls are a universal constant. He slams his mug down, his patience clearly gone, and tells the rowdy patrons to be quiet. His interruption earns him the bounty hunter's full attention. He grabs the man by the collar, telling him to be quiet, and sends him flying with a single furious punch. He stands ready, daring anyone else to start a fight. Guess he's not a fan of dinner theater. Elsewhere in the tavern, Lemelin nervously asks Hans a question. She wonders why they've been waiting here for so long, but Hans just tells her not to ask, as he has his reasons. He simply tells her to sit down and eat. She's taken aback, reminding him of her status as a slave, but he just repeats the command with a steady gaze. Her fear melts away into a bright, grateful smile. She happily digs into her food, a rare moment of peace, but Hans knows an army of elite night spirits is on its way, and they're led by the infamous Raidok. If he succeeds in his mission, it's game over for everyone. Hans knows he has to protect this citadel at all costs. The heroes who were supposed to be here are all dead. He'd hoped for a replacement, but all he sees is a tavern brawl. Guess the B team will have to do. The fight ends as quickly as it began, with one decisive punch. Hans turns to Lemelin, asking if she's scared. He downs his drink, having given up on finding any other heroes. The brawl ends with one final decisive punch, so Hans decides to switch gears and look for items instead. But his quiet moment is interrupted by a flying mug. Lemelin looks on in terror, worried for his safety, but Hans just smirks, admitting he was getting bored anyway. He knows Lemelin probably thinks he's just been slacking off. Guess it's time to prove her wrong. He gets the attention of the loudest man in the room. The brawler turns, completely caught off guard, and Hans unleashes a single, lightning-fast strike. The punch connects with devastating force. The brawler hits the floor and a new challenger steps forward. The defeated man can only question his own lack of strength. The red-haired warrior complains that the fight ended too quickly. Guess he was hoping for more of a show. He asks Hans who he is, demanding an answer. But then he recognizes the mask from Aram village. And Hans's cold gaze confirms their shared history. A memory flashes back to a night of slaughter. A younger version of the warrior asks if they are truly strong, but the answer is a resounding, horrifying no. They weren't strong. They were just lucky to survive. The warrior's mind flashes back to a scene of utter devastation, but Hans has no time for someone else's tragic backstory. The warrior questions his strange words, but Hans knows this body remembers him. He calls to Lemelin, telling her it's time to leave, and they walk out, leaving the warrior to stare after them in confusion. Lemelin glances back, a worried look in her eyes, but her face triggers another memory for the warrior. Of a girl with a familiar smile. He reaches out, calling a name that isn't hers, but he quickly remembers that the person he seeks is long gone. The scene shifts to a new day and a new destination. Hans asks Lemelin if she knows how to use a sword. She admits she has a little experience, but when he asks if she's any good, she says no. He then asks about a bow, but she's never used one. He concludes that she's completely unskilled. She apologizes, but he tells her it's fine. He figures it's better to start from scratch. Guess her resume was a little thin on combat experience. His eyes scan the wall, looking for the right tool. He grabs a strange, specialized crossbow from the rack and tells her to try this one instead. She admits she has no experience with the weapon, but Hans just gives her a confident smirk. He tells her not to worry about it, because she's about to learn the hard way. Guess it's time for some on-the-job training. He knows her race, the piebalds, are special. She takes aim, her focus absolute. They possess a natural combat instinct, learning at an impossible rate. Her very first shot hits the target dead center. A bright, triumphant smile spreads across her face, a feat that should have taken weeks of practice. Guess she's a natural. He questions how she mastered the weapon in mere hours, but he notes there's just one small downside. Her natural talent still can't compare to Pavels's. The fallen hero's ability was a guaranteed hit every single time, a memory of the hero's flawless, almost magical precision. Guess aimbots are a thing in this world too. He calls out her name, breaking her from her thoughts. He then gets back to work, preparing for their next move. He picks up a simple cloth sack and hands it over to a very confused Lemelin. He knows she can't look like a slave for what's coming next. He explains that her new role is a big part of this operation. The day of the attack finally arrives. After a week of preparation, he tells Lemelin the enemy is here. She agrees, her voice steady. She picks up the heavy case they've prepared, and they head out to face the coming storm. Hans knows there's no luck in this world, only strength gained through experience. Lemelin is now geared up, ready to play her part. She asks if he's worried, but he confidently denies it. Guess he's not the type to admit he's nervous. After all, her training has paid off spectacularly. On the citadel walls, the warning bell rings out. A guard shouts the order to man the defenses. Soldiers rush to their posts, lining the battlements in perfect formation. The city's defenders are ready for a fight. It seems they've been waiting for this moment. Even the red-haired warrior from the tavern seems eager. Guess he was bored of just punching locals. He spots Hans and Lemelin, recalling the alchemist's words. He clenches his fist, deciding to thank him after the battle. And just in time as the army of the dead arrives, a tattered banner flies against the stormy sky. The army of the dead roars, calling the defenders invaders. Their leader scoffs at the defenders' audacity. Lemelin looks on nervously as the enemy leader continues his speech. He asks if they aren't afraid of divine punishment. Guess he's the judge, jury, and executioner around here. His cold, metallic gaze sweeps over the battlefield. But a new masked archer has heard enough. He focuses his power, his sights set on the enemy commander. He draws his bow, confident in his ultimate shot, and unleashes a single brilliant arrow of light. The arrow finds its mark, and the commander's head dissolves into shadow. The red-haired warrior and his men can only stare in disbelief. Even the citadel's own soldiers are completely stunned by the attack. Lemelin looks up, realizing who fired the impossible shot. A lone cloaked figure stands on the battlements above. It's Hans, and even he seems surprised by his own power. Guess he didn't expect a critical hit. The commander's form vanishes into the night sky. But from the shadows below, Raidok looks up, very much not dead. His eye burns with a furious purple light, enraged by the disrespect. But the soldiers don't notice, erupting in a triumphant cheer. The soldiers erupt in a cheer, convinced the enemy is weaker than they look. But Hans knows it was just a bluff to boost morale. Guess a little white lie never hurt anyone. He tells Lemelin it's time for them to move. He warns her that the real attack is about to begin. And from the sky, a massive vortex of fire begins to form. Lemelin looks up, her eyes reflecting the coming storm. Her expression quickly shifts from confusion to pure terror. As they leave, the other soldiers can only watch in confusion. A massive fireball descends upon the citadel walls, and the celebration is cut short by a devastating explosion. The army of the dead advances, undeterred by the flames. The red-haired warrior shields his face from the dust and debris. Below, the citadel's defenders are scattered and broken. A massive breach in the wall signals the start of the real invasion. The soldiers try to rally, preparing for close-quarters combat. An order rings out to aim for the casters in the back, but some mercenaries are just happy about the hazard pay, while others are completely overwhelmed by fear One soldier deserts his post, choosing to run for his life. Guess he's not getting that bonus. The other mercenaries watch, debating the logic of self-preservation. The red-haired warrior doubts the deserter will even survive. His men agree, seeing no way out of this alive. Their only hope is for a hero to miraculously appear. But all that appears is another wave of fiery destruction. On the ground, a soldier cries out for help, but his plea is cut short by the invading army. The knight stands victorious, its dark work complete. The red-haired warrior fights on, but he's hopelessly outnumbered. Guess his pep talk didn't work on the undead. He manages to land a solid blow on one of the knights, but the creature just dissolves into shadow, unimpressed. He catches his breath, admitting he almost died. He admits these monsters are on another level. He turns, wondering how his comrades are faring. But he only sees another soldier fall, but another soldier rallies the troops, refusing to fall. He reminds them of the families they're protecting, and with a furious cry, he charges into the fray. But his attack is effortlessly blocked. Guess motivational speeches don't work on the undead. The knight scoffs at his bravado after a single kill, and the soldier's world is turned upside down. The knight swings its massive scythe in a deadly arc. It declares that all invaders must be eliminated. The red-haired warrior can only stare in utter disbelief. The knight moves like a blur of shadow across the wall. It looms over the warrior, ready to deliver the final blow, and brings its blade down with a single deadly command. The warrior can only accept his fate. Guess his luck finally ran out. But another knight on horseback charges past, ignoring him completely as it rides into the fray. The warrior looks up, completely stunned by his last-second rescue. A new knight has arrived, his armor glowing with a strange light. He effortlessly blocks the scythe-wielding monster's attack and sends the creature stumbling backward. His dark steed's gaze is just as intense as its rider's. He follows up with a devastating counterattack. It's Hans, asking the warrior if he's okay. Guess the cavalry has officially arrived. He seems satisfied with the stammered affirmative response. He tells the man to order a retreat for the others, then turns to Lemeline, ready to continue their own mission. But the warrior realizes he's heading straight into the enemy's heart. They charge deeper into the fray, a blur of shadow and light. The undead knights move to block their path. He tells Lemeline to hold on as they break through the line, and they soar right over the heads of the enemy soldiers. He has no time to waste on these minions. His plan is simple: go straight for the final boss. Guess he's a fan of speedruns. The warrior watches, concluding the man has no fear of death. They press on, a lone force against an entire army. But the enemy's own cavalry quickly gives chase. Hans notes that every single one of these spirits is an elite, but he knows their formation is a weakness he can exploit with Gerbier's horsemanship. His dark steed thunders across the battlefield. He combines it with the spear arts of the fallen hero, Cadiz, and cuts a path of golden light through the enemy ranks. The enemy commander can only watch this reckless charge in disbelief, but his surprise quickly turns to amusement. Guess he appreciates the showmanship. He raises his own weapon, ready for a fight, and slams it down, unleashing a wave of dark power. The knights close in, trapping Hans in a sea of enemies. Hans tightens his grip on the reins, and his steed rears up, parting the sea of soldiers. Lemeline can only stare, realizing a path has opened. The commander watches as Hans rides straight for him. Guess he's getting the VIP treatment. But Hans suddenly tells Lemeline to get off the horse. He assures her that these soldiers won't attack her. He dismounts, walking forward to face the commander alone. Raidok asks if he truly came all this way by himself. But Hans clarifies that he didn't come alone. The commander's aura flares as he demands to know his purpose. The army's glowing blue eyes stare back, a sea of silent soldiers. And Hans finds himself completely surrounded. Guess the welcome wagon is a bit aggressive. Lemeline calls out to him, her voice filled with terror. But Hans simply tells her to be quiet. He then tosses a piece of cloth onto the ground, letting it land right at the commander's feet. Raidok and his lieutenant look down, their curiosity piqued. One of the knights kneels, examining the strange offering. He points to a crest embroidered on the fabric. Raidok recognizes the family crest, asking if Hans is a knight. Hans confirms the commander's suspicion. He knows this is a formal challenge, a duel of honor, and Raidok is a man who values that honor above all else. The commander seems amused by this old-world custom. Of course, Hans admits the crest is a complete fake. Guess a little arts and crafts can go a long way. He calls out to the vengeful spirit, appealing to his knightly code, and formally challenges Raidok Schultine to a duel of honor. The challenge hangs heavy in the air. He waits for the commander's response, completely surrounded, and Lemeline looks like her soul just left her body. Hans waits, wondering if his bluff will be called. His hand tightens, a part of him ready to flee. but Raidok's aura flares with amusement. He then points to Lemelin, asking about her role. The sudden attention leaves the girl completely stunned. Hans gives a vague but affirmative response. Guess emotional support bait is too long for a job title. Raidok then declares her the official witness to their duel, a role she seems less than thrilled to accept. But Hans agrees, knowing this ensures her safety. And with that, Raidok formally accepts the challenge. Raidok's steed snorts, its eyes glowing with red malice. The commander sits tall, a figure of pure shadow and rage. He introduces himself and asks for his challenger's name. Hans gives a new name for the occasion, Evan. Guess Hans didn't sound knightly enough. Raidok accepts, declaring their duel will be one for the ages. He tells Lemelin to stay back, his tone leaving no room for argument. She can only watch, her face a mask of pure concern. And with a final declaration, the duel officially begins. Hans recalls that every boss so far has followed a set pattern, just like in the game he once played. Raidok opens with a devastating overhead swing, but Hans is certain he'll be no exception to the rule. With that knowledge, there's no reason to hesitate. He decides to face the commander head-on. Raidok seems impressed by Evan's lack of fear, and promises to answer that courage with his full strength. Guess he's not a fan of holding back. The commander charges forward, his dark aura flaring. He raises his massive axe, ready for the clash. But Hans notices a sudden change in his battle stance. Under the pale moonlight, their duel is about to begin. From a safe distance, Lemelin watches the two knights face off, but she senses a sudden dangerous shift in the atmosphere. Hans reacts as well, his steed ready for anything. But even he didn't expect the boss to enter a berserk mode this early. Raidok's entire form is now consumed by a furious, blood-red aura. Hans quickly formulates a new plan. Take out the horse. Guess PETA doesn't exist in this world. But he questions if he can even survive against this powered-up version. Raidok taunts him, wondering why he's hesitating. He declares that if Hans won't attack, he'll gladly start the next round. And even his demonic steed seems eager for the slaughter. Raidok's axe pulses with a dark, chaotic energy. He raises the weapon, ready to bring it down. But Evan is unfazed, claiming he knows this attack pattern. He recalls Cadiz's ability to absorb an attack to break a foe's balance. Raidok offers him an honorable death. Guess he's a gracious host. The commander's gaze is fixed, his power building. Evan prepares to meet the attack, his own weapon held steady. The two forces collide in a blinding flash of light. He struggles to channel the immense energy from the blow, and redirects the commander's power back at him. The commander is sent stumbling back, his dark aura flaring. Evan sees his opening, believing the boss has lost his balance. But Raidok's steed recovers with impossible speed. Evan curses the game, realizing this boss has a few unlisted skills. Raidok laughs, taunting him about the failed maneuver. Evan's gaze hardens, wondering if he's being toyed with. The commander unleashes another devastating wave of energy, and Evan meets the attack with a golden arc of his own. Raidok seems impressed that he's still standing, but Evan can feel the strain, his borrowed power pushed to its limit. He knows he can't win by just defending, but Raidok taunts him, refusing to give him a moment to think. The strain on his body is becoming unbearable. The commander's steed moves with impossible grace. Evan grits his teeth, searching for any opening. He circles the battlefield, trying to find a new angle. But his opponent is always one step ahead. Raidok soars through the air for another devastating strike. Guess he's not a fan of fighting on solid ground. Evan realizes this next attack is serious, and the commander roars, ready to end this duel for good. Evan tightens his grip, ready to make his move. He leaps from his steed, aiming for the commander's mount, but Raidok dismisses the attack as completely useless. Evan channels a new power, his spear glowing with golden light. He knows this boss has a special trait that buffs aggressive foes, and he plans to use that to his advantage. He declares this single strike will end the fight. Confident that the commander can't possibly dodge it. Guess our boy is feeling a little cocky. Raidok can only watch as the attack descends, but Evan reveals his true target was never the commander at all. The spear finds its mark, piercing the commander's demonic steed. The beast falls, forcing Raidok to the ground for the first time. Evan knows he's sealed the boss's mobility, but it cost him dearly. He recalls that the hero Cadiz's skills are incredibly powerful, but they come with a severe stamina cost. Even with Gerbier's strength, it only slows the inevitable drain. His muscles are already screaming in protest. Guess this body doesn't have a great warranty. But Raidok seems almost impressed by the development. He admits it's been a long time since anyone forced him to dismount. But he declares that this is as far as Evan will go. Raidok unleashes his true power, a technique called Alboros. He declares that from now on, he'll use everything he has. From the sidelines, Lemeline can only watch in terror, but a familiar voice cuts through the tension. As the red-haired warrior from the tavern arrives, he approaches, his gaze fixed on the duel. He asks Lemeline to explain the situation. She tells him that Hans promised he could end the battle. The warrior points out that it looks like her master is losing. Guess he's not a fan of wishful thinking. But she recalls Hans's one command, to stay still and trust him. The warrior tells her to make her own decisions and act, because he knows that if Hans falls, it's over for everyone. On the battlefield, Raidok declares it's time for round 2. Hans curses his luck, caught without a weapon. He recalls the convenience of the game's item box, and the harsh reality of carrying his own gear. Guess there's no infinite inventory cheat here. He snaps back to the present, calling for Lemeline to give him a sword. She scrambles to obey, her face a mask of terror. But Raidok simply scoffs, his patience worn thin, and lunges forward in a blur of dark energy, convinced it's already too late. The red-haired warrior scolds Lemeline for her hesitation. He then calls out to Hans, ready to intervene, and throws a sword, declaring his debt for his arm has been repaid. Guess that's one way to say thank you. Raidok's attack descends just as the weapon reaches Hans. He catches the blade in the nick of time, and swings it in a golden arc to meet the commander's strike. The two forces collide in a blinding flash of power, but Hans can feel the overwhelming difference in their strength. He's sent stumbling back, barely holding his ground. Under the pale moonlight, the duel rages on. The red-haired warrior watches as Lemeline reaches into a bag. Her eyes burn with a new resolve to be useful to her master. On the battlefield, Hans unleashes a furious flurry of strikes, but Raidok scoffs, unimpressed by his current level of skill. Hans can only grit his teeth and block the overwhelming counterattack. He struggles to endure the immense pressure of the duel, but he knows all his training has led to this very moment. Raidok acknowledges his opponent's unyielding spirit. Guess he respects the hustle, and prepares to unleash another devastating blow. But Hans sees it, a subtle shift in the commander's stance. It's time. Hans channels all his remaining power into the blade. He leaps into the air, bringing the sword down with all his might. But the borrowed blade shatters on impact, a reaction that leaves his allies completely stunned. Guess that sword wasn't a cheap rental. Raidok admits he underestimated his opponent's resolve. He claims to have analyzed Evan's patterns, ready to end this. He unleashes a furious lightning-fast strike, closing the distance in an instant. His form is a blur of pure destructive energy. But Hans reaches for one last trick up his sleeve. He pulls out one of Pavel's explosive crimson stones, and declares he's done playing by the rules. Guess honor has its limits. But Raidok scoffs, dismissing the attack as useless. He recognizes the crimson stone, his surprise evident. Hans calls out to Lemeline, telling her to get ready. She takes aim, determined not to hesitate this time. Her bolt strikes true, triggering a massive explosion. The battlefield is consumed by smoke and fire. But through the haze, Raidok's silhouette remains standing. He emerges from the flames, completely unfazed by the blast. But Hans reveals he came prepared for this exact moment, pulling out a trident. Raidok scoffs at the strange weapon, feeling insulted by the choice. Guess he's a sword purist. But Hans stands his ground, a net in his other hand, his resolve unbroken. The commander dives in for another attack, his rage building. He mocks the so-called knight, but Hans knows this underestimation is key. He's counting on the commander's arrogance to create an opening. He asks if a knight's arsenal is limited to just a sword. Raidok roars back that no knight in history has ever used a net. Hans questions if true knighthood is just looking down on your opponent. The question hits its mark, leaving the commander momentarily speechless. Hans taunts the commander, telling him not to cry for help later. Raidok's fury builds, his dark energy swirling at his feet. He roars at his soldiers, ordering them not to interrupt the duel. He declares that this is a direct command from their leader. The army stands down, obeying without a single question. Raidok drives his blade into the earth, marking a line in the ground. His soldiers form a perfect circle, sealing off the dueling arena. Guess they're selling tickets for this. The red-haired warrior can only watch, completely baffled by this turn of events. But Hans knows his psychological warfare has worked perfectly. Raidok's rage intensifies, questioning his opponent's sudden confidence. The commander's power flares, his gauntlet crackling with dark energy. He stands as a figure of pure, unbridled rage. Hans knows he could never win with his current skills. If this were his first time fighting this battle, he tightens his grip on the net, his own power flaring to life, and leaps into the air, diving straight at the commander. He throws the net with absolute precision. The trap descends upon the vengeful spirit below. Guess it's fishing season. But Raidok dismisses the attack as completely worthless. and slices the net to ribbons with a single effortless swing. But Hans reveals this net was specially made for this occasion. The trap holds firm, its ropes glowing with a strange power, and Raidok realizes it's been soaked in holy water. Hans adds that he threw in some silver for good measure. The commander calls him a coward, but Hans questions the need for fairness when his life is on the line. With his opponent trapped, he finally removes his helmet. His true face is revealed, his only goal to survive this ordeal. Guess the whole Evan persona has been retired. He stands over the ensnared commander, declaring it's his turn now. And from the sidelines, the red-haired warrior finally recognizes him as Hans. Under the pale moonlight, the final act of their duel is about to begin. Hans admits that getting to this point was hard, but what comes next is easy. His eyes burn with a cold, calculated confidence. He recalls the rare items he's gathered for this fight, knowing a normal player could never afford them. Guess that Diluc treasure money didn't last long. He approaches the trapped commander, trident in hand. He thinks of the memories and abilities he's absorbed from all the fallen heroes he's encountered. And he knows he didn't come here without a plan. He's about to use the combat style of an ancient gladiator, the retiarius who trapped their foes with a net before delivering the final blow. He knows this ancient style is especially effective against a knight who's never seen it before. Raidok admits the net was a brilliant, unexpected move, but he's baffled by his opponent's sudden change in style. He struggles against the holy bonds, completely confused, but Hans just gives him a knowing smirk. The commander thrashes, his dark power suppressed. Hans then asks if he really thought one net was enough. Guess he believes in having a backup plan. Raidok knows he has to break free immediately, but Hans just tosses another net, adding insult to injury. Raidok struggles, trying to cut his way free, but Hans denies him that simple escape. The commander tries to use his shield to block the second net, but it's too late, leaving him completely ensnared. Guess he didn't see that 2-for-1 special coming. Hans reveals this isn't their first encounter, much to Raidok's confusion. The commander's mind races, realizing Hans came straight here, and successfully isolated him for a one-on-one duel. He recalls the fake crest, the trident, and the holy water, and it dawns on him that this was all part of a meticulous plan, but he refuses to believe it, dismissing it all as impossible luck. Raidok realizes it was all a calculated taunt to enrage him. Hans asks why he doesn't just give up, and drives the trident forward with a flash of golden light. The commander demands a fair fight with a sword. Guess the net and trident combo isn't in the knightly handbook, but Hans knows his stamina is fading, with only one chance left. He declares that this chance is all he needs to end it. He'll strike now, while the commander is at his most furious. Raidok swings wildly, but Hans has already moved, dropping a third net. Hans looks back, his expression calm and steady. He reminds the commander that this isn't their first meeting. Raidok roars in defiance, refusing to believe Hans's words. He insists they've never met before, his rage building, and unleashes a wave of dark energy, trying to break free. But Hans's gaze is fixed, his own power flaring to life. He plants his feet, ready to end this once and for all. He channels the ultimate skill of the fallen hero, Cadiz, and lunges forward in a blinding flash of golden light. The two forces collide in a devastating explosion. Guess it's time to skip the boss's final monologue. A pillar of light erupts, tearing through the commander's dark form, and Raidok's body dissolves into nothing but shadow and dust. The allies can only watch as the commander's dark energy fades away. His soldiers cry out in despair as their leader is vanquished. Their final desperate pleas echo across the battlefield. And with their master gone, the entire army dissolves into nothing. Hans looks up as a single item falls from the sky, his prize for winning. He knows this is the hidden artifact, a reward for his one-on-one victory. He reaches out, catching the glowing necklace in his gauntlet. A powerful item he knows will be useful for the grim future ahead. Guess it pays to be the main character. But the victory comes at a cost. As Hans finally collapses from exhaustion, the scene shifts, and our hero is back on his feet, ready for the next leg of his journey. The battle is over, but as they leave, the red-haired warrior watches them go. He cries out Hans's name, his voice filled with disbelief. He rushes forward, confronting the man he thought he knew. He grabs Hans by the collar, demanding to know what happened. He questions why Hans is even here in the first place. But Hans just calmly denies his own identity. Guess the amnesia excuse is back on the table. The warrior refuses to believe him, his anger growing. He's certain he could never mistake that face. Hans knows there's no point in explaining the whole body-snatching situation. Besides, it would just be a massive inconvenience. The warrior demands an answer, his grip tight with desperation. Lemelin can only watch, her face a mask of concern. but Hans just turns his back, telling her it's time to go. He says he's leaving this place and she can stay if she wants. A response that sends Lemelin into a complete panic. She begs him not to abandon her now. Guess the job security is just too good. But Hans knows his work here is done and he has to move on. After all, defeating a legendary commander tends to attract unwanted attention. And so they leave, with the red-haired warrior left behind in the dust. The sky burns a fitting end to a night of impossible victory. The red-haired warrior is left alone on the battlefield. His mind flashes back to the slaughter at Aram village, a memory of loss and a question that still haunts him. He recalls searching for Hans among the fallen. Back in the present, the pain in his arm brings him back. He tries to make sense of what just happened. Guess a ghost army duel is a lot to process, but his one goal now is to find Hans. Elsewhere, a new cloaked figure faces a monstrous beast. He seems completely unimpressed by the creature's size, and meets its attack without a hint of hesitation. The red-haired warrior shows off his questionable artistic skills. He recalls his life as a hero, saving people and slaying monsters. But through it all, he was always searching for one person. A search that led him through countless battles, but never to his friend. He remembers his own journey ending in failure, his one regret unresolved. Finding Hans had become a complete obsession, because to him, Hans was his only true friend. And now, after all this time, he's finally found him. But his heartfelt reunion is cut short by a fist to the face. Guess Hans isn't feeling sentimental. The scene shifts to a dark forest, where unseen eyes watch from the shadows. Hans sits by the fire, preparing a strange-looking leaf. Lemelin questions his choice of campfire fuel. He tosses the leaf into the flames without a word. He explains it's a medicinal herb to ward off danger. Its effects will last for 12 hours if burned correctly. He then hands one to her, telling her to do the same. The fire crackles, the herb smoke filling the air. Guess it's better than monster repellent spray. But Lemelin remains silent, her head bowed in thought. She finally gets his attention, her voice hesitant, and asks the one question that's been on her mind. Who is he? He gives a simple answer, claiming to be an ordinary wanderer. But as Lemelin tries to argue, he cuts her off with a sharp command. Suddenly, a blur of motion cuts through the dark forest, and a figure in full armor lands silently in the clearing. Lemelin calls out to her master, her eyes wide with alarm. But Hans tells her to forget it, as they're already surrounded. Their quiet campsite is now encircled by cloaked, armored figures. Guess their do not disturb sign wasn't very effective. Lemelin holds her blade, her voice filled with concern. A man steps forward, identifying him as Evan, the wandering knight. Hans gives a vague answer and asks who they are. He introduces himself as the commander of the 5th Knighthood of Pistanzi, a man by the name of Albergito Kelvin. Hans is completely unfazed, asking what they want with him. Kelvin politely asks him to come along, but Hans wants to know why. The commander just smiles, saying he can't reveal the reason. Guess it's a surprise is their official policy. Hans's eyes narrow, asking what happens if he refuses. Kelvin's hand rests on his sword, implying he'll have to be a little discourteous. So Hans sarcastically agrees to go along with them. The commander thanks him for his cooperation, his friendly mask back in place. But Hans sees right through the act, knowing the man hides behind his authority. His internal monologue confirms his first impression of these knights. A golden aura flares to life as he grips his weapon. His eyes burn with a sudden furious resolve. He imagines drawing his blade and striking down the commander first, then using Kadiz's power to cut down the man behind him. He knows if he can just rush in before they're ready, he might just have a chance to win this. But in reality, the knights have already formed a perfect line. Guess they're not the type to monologue. He admits he can't fully utilize Kadiz's power just yet, and so, for now, he has no choice but to surrender. Kelvin asks if he's planning to resist. Hans scoffs, questioning how that could be possible. He agrees to cooperate, though his expression says otherwise. He was planning on following them from the start anyway. Guess this just saves him the trouble of tracking them. He gives Lemelin a light tap to snap her out of it, and tells her to grab their things as they head out. Kelvin thanks him for his cooperation, offering a carriage. The commander lets out a strained, unconvincing laugh, but his friendly facade drops, sensing the killing intent from Hans. He knows the moment Hans picked up his sword, he was ready to fight. But as they walk, Kelvin notices something about Hans's stride. He can tell by the way the boy carries himself that he's trained with more than just a sword. But the commander dismisses the thought as impossible. Unless, of course, the kid is a ridiculous genius. Guess he's not ruling it out. And so, their journey to Pistanza begins under heavy guard. Inside the carriage, Hans asks Lemelin why she's so scared. She admits she's terrified of being surrounded by so many men. Her past trauma is clearly resurfacing in the enclosed space. Hans points out that he's a man too, but knows she's not talking about him. He recalls her past, knowing she was captured long before he found her. He realizes her current fear is different from anything he's seen before. Her trauma stems from being captured by the very soldiers meant to protect. For now, he decides to let her stay close. The carriage travels through the moonlit forest. But Hans reveals they have a detour to make before reaching Pistanze. He knows this will be an inconvenience for their nightly escort, but he couldn't care less about their travel plans. Guess he's not aiming for a 5-star passenger rating. For now, he and Lemelin find a moment of rest on the long journey, and for the first time, she seems completely at ease. Lemelin's thoughts drift to the man beside her. She admits he's a strange person who always tries to push her away, but she sees a different side to him in these quiet moments. Guess even stoic heroes drool in their sleep. A small, genuine smile spreads across her face, because despite his harsh words, he always keeps her safe. He's a walking contradiction, a puzzle she can't solve, and she feels a sense of peace with him she's never known before. But she's hiding a secret she's sure would make him hate her. A strange blue energy surrounds her as she clutches the hidden item. A glowing necklace, a symbol of a past she can't escape. The morning sun cuts through the trees as their journey continues. Inside the carriage, Hans tries to stretch out his aching muscles. The fatigue from his battle with Raidok still hasn't faded. He's absorbed the skills and experience of fallen heroes, but he's just forcing their powers together without any real harmony. This imperfect method is putting a massive strain on his body. Guess there's no user manual for these things. He knows he needs to find a way to properly synthesize these skills. And that's exactly why they're heading to a place called Poxel Village. He gets the commander's attention, bringing the convoy to a halt, and calmly advises him that it's probably best if they don't go there. He explains that he's heard of a plague in the village up ahead. The commander seems intrigued by the news. Hans uses Lemelin as an excuse, but Kelvin insists they must go and help. He questions the commander's logic, but Kelvin assures him they have a cleric. He then gives a grand speech about their duty to protect the weak. Guess he's a real Boy Scout. But Hans's smirk reveals this is all going exactly according to his plan, and so their convoy makes its way to the afflicted village. Their arrival is met with cries of relief from the desperate villagers. The sick and dying plead for the knights to save them, and Kelvin immediately begins ordering his men to secure the area and help the people. Hans steps out of the carriage with a long theatrical stretch. He asks the commander for permission to look around, and Kelvin agrees. The commander warns him to stay close as the monsters responsible may be nearby. But Hans knows the monsters aren't the real problem in this village. He turns to Lemelin, telling her to prepare their equipment. He knows this plague all too well. It's the green moss disease, an illness that slowly eats away at the body as a strange moss forms on the skin. It's a horrifying affliction that consumes its victims from the inside out. Guess Get Your Greens has a dark side. They walk through the village as the sick and dying watch them pass. A woman begs for water, but Hans's gaze remains cold and distant. She begs for help, her child unable to even drink water. But Hans just turns his back, walking away from her plea. Lemelin watches the suffering villagers, her heart clearly aching. She calls out to her master, unable to understand his cruelty. But he just gives her an annoyed glance. Guess the hero package doesn't include basic empathy. His hand tightens around the blade on his gauntlet. Lemelin's eyes widen, realizing what he's about to do. He steps in front of her, ordering her to get back, and warns the desperate villagers not to come any closer. The woman can only plead for her life, completely terrified. But then he tells Lemelin to get the water from her bag. She lights up, thinking he's finally showing some compassion. She quickly hands over the water skin. But Hans's expression remains as cold as ever. He tosses the water to the desperate mother and tells her to take it and get lost. The woman thanks Lemelin, tears of gratitude in her eyes. Guess being a jerk means you don't get any of the credit. Lemelin thanks him, but he warns her to be careful of the plague. It's transmitted by contact, so she's to stay close to him and him alone. Lemelin's face lights up, asking if that means she just has to stay away. But Hans questions if she's even listening, asking if she plans to help them anyway. He knows there's no logical reason to help, but forcing her to obey would only make her resent him. So he just threatens to cut her salary, which she confusedly accepts. Guess that's his version of a compromise. He gives her one final warning. If she gets infected, he's leaving her behind. He tries to recall a specific event from the game that can trigger here, but dismisses the thought. So he just sits by the well, waiting for his plan to unfold. Lemelin approaches, thanking him for his small act of kindness, but he just brushes it off, saying it was just to keep the villagers from causing trouble. He knows she sees her own past in their suffering, so he turns to Lemeline and makes her swear an oath. From now on, she is not to help anyone without his permission. He warns that her half-hearted kindness will only get her hurt, and with a sudden shove, he sends her tumbling into the well. Guess that's his version of tough love. She lands at the bottom, calling out to him as he looks down, completely unfazed. His eyes are cold, his plan unfolding just as he remembered. He recalls this place from the game, a torch-lit passage, hidden at the bottom of this very well. Lemeline looks up, completely terrified, asking where he's brought her. He explains this is the Kirrett sewers, the source of the plague, and from here on, it's the territory of the sewer's ruler. He turns to Lemeline, warning her that following him could be fatal. He draws a small blade from his gauntlet and asks if she'll still follow, even as he dispatches a monster. The infected creature falls, a grim reminder of the danger. Lemeline can only watch, her expression troubled. The green moss on its back confirms the source of the disease. Guess this place doesn't get many health inspections. But her resolve doesn't waver, and she gives a firm nod. So Hans offers her a dagger, telling her to take it. He questions her hesitation, reminding her he's already taught her the basics. But she admits she's much more comfortable with her crossbow. He tells her she can't just fight from a distance forever. To survive in this world, she'll need a variety of experiences, and since she chose to be his companion, she'll have to endure it. Their first lesson, a pack of massive infected rats. Guess this is the final exam. A whole swarm of them emerges from the darkness, and they charge forward without a moment's hesitation. Hans leaps into the fray, ready to meet them head-on. He prepares to strike as the first monster lunges. His blade cuts through the darkness, a blur of silver and green. He moves like a phantom, dispatching the infected creatures with ease. He figures she should be able to handle at least one on her own, but Lemeline is completely frozen by fear. She swings wildly, trying to fend off a single, confused-looking rat. Hans can't believe she's panicking this much. Guess her resume was a little padded. He recalls how well she did in her first real battle, but knows that fighting up close is a completely different game. The monster's breath is hot on her face, its red eyes burning, and the feeling of a blade sinking into flesh is a terrifying lesson. All of those feelings combine into pure, overwhelming panic. Hans recalls that even with the hero's skills, he can't forget the terror of his first fight with the Wolfricon. He knows she has the spirit, but her lack of experience is painfully obvious. He decides she has to learn to fight on her own, so he tells her to grab the long stick from her bag if she wants to live. She quickly fumbles through her pack and pulls out a strange wooden staff. Following his command, she slams it against the stone wall, and it unleashes a massive fireball. Guess that's not just any old stick. Lemeline stares at the magical torch in complete awe. Hans explains it's an expensive item that repels weaker monsters, but he tells her to stop hesitating and just kill the rat. Guess scare them off wasn't part of the lesson plan. She's taken aback by the command, but quickly steals her resolve. She knows she can't be afraid forever if she wants to survive. She remembers how her master always finds his focus, and her eyes snap open with a new, burning determination. She leaps forward, dagger held high, and brings the blade down with a single, decisive strike. The creature dissolves into green smoke, her first close-quarters kill complete. Hans watches as Lemeline takes her first steps into this new, brutal world. She catches her breath, the adrenaline of the fight still coursing through her. They continue their journey deeper into the torch-lit sewers, and she begins to keep a mental tally of her kills. They press on, the path ahead dark and uncertain. Hans runs a hand along the wall, confirming the layout is just as he remembers. Every detail matches the game he once played, so he decides it's time to skip ahead to the main event. He pulls out 2 familiar red stones, ready to face the ruler. Guess he's a big fan of Pavel's explosive problem-solving methods. He drops a small trigger, a final piece to his explosive puzzle. He calls out to Lemeline, getting her attention, and shoves her head down just as the stones activate. Guess that's his version of a safety warning. The crimson gems pulse with a destructive energy, and Lemeline's eyes widen in pure, unadulterated panic. The entire sewer is consumed by a massive explosion. When the smoke clears, a new path has been blasted open. Hans sits down, taking a moment to admire his handiwork. While Lemeline's soul just about leaves her body from the shock, he tells her to pull it together as he walks into the darkness. She notes that the rats in this area are much smaller. They've arrived in a massive cavern, the heart of the sewer. Hans turns to her, asking if she's holding up okay. She insists she's fine, just that her pack is a little heavy, but he clarifies he was talking about the overwhelming stench. She quickly assures him that she can handle it. Guess she's getting used to the sewer lifestyle. And in the darkness below, the source of the plague waits, Kirrett. Hans knows he could end this with a single well-placed shot, but that would just summon the entire rat army to their location. So he turns to Lemelin asking for the bag. Time for Plan B. He reveals a set of special explosive arrows, a combination he learned from the fallen hero, Pavel's. Lemelin worries about the weight of the arrowheads, but Hans just questions her doubt. He tells her to watch closely, as this is a lesson she'll need to learn. He aims, explaining that with Pavel's sure-hit skill, missing is simply not an option. Guess that's one perk of absorbing your dead friends. The only question is where to aim for maximum effect. The arrow detonates, clearing a massive area in a single blast. Lemelin can only stare in awe as Hans tells her it's her turn. She hands him the arrow, ready to follow his lead. He calls out his next target, aiming with deadly precision. A lone rat can only watch as the explosive tip descends, and the cavern is rocked by another fiery blast. He takes another arrow, his lesson far from over. He explains the rat's predictable burrowing patterns, allowing him to perfectly anticipate their every move. Guess these rats aren't very good at hide-and-seek. He unleashes another devastating shot, and another, clearing out the burrows one by one. He calls out the remaining targets, his victory already assured. A volley of explosions tears through the cavern walls. He prepares one final arrow, his work almost done. His target is the last remaining cluster of infected rats. The bolt strikes true, a flash of crimson light, and the final swarm is consumed by a massive fireball. Lemelin can only watch, completely stunned by the display, but all that noise has finally woken up the boss. The sewer's ruler, Kirrett, rises to its feet. Hans and Lemelin look down at the true source of the plague, and Hans greets the monster with his usual warm welcome. Guess he's not a fan of rodents. Its skull-like face twists in a silent snarl, and it lets out a furious, echoing roar. The beast looks around, confused by the sudden silence. Its gaze finally lands on the two figures above. Hans and Lemelin look down at the enraged monster. He taunts the beast, asking what it can do without its army. Guess trash talk works on giant rats, too. The monster's red eye burns with pure, unbridled fury. Hans knows this is a hidden dungeon, unlike any other. If everything was the same as the game, he wouldn't be here. Because right now, killing Kirrett is completely impossible. He knows it's possible thanks to the artifact from the Albon Citadel, a special necklace that can summon the very spirit he defeated. But just summoning Raidok doesn't guarantee his cooperation. So he calls out to the fallen commander, his plan in motion. And from the necklace, a dark energy swirls in the cavern below. A familiar figure rises from the shadows, asking who called him. It's Raidok, who seems less than thrilled about his new job. He looks down at his own spectral form, completely bewildered. Hans notes that the commander's invincibility buff is gone, and Raidok can only stare at the monster below, utterly confused. The massive rat lunges at the summoned commander, and sends the spectral knight flying into the cavern wall. Raidok gets to his feet, his patience clearly gone, and unleashes his ultimate technique, Alboros, but Hans calls down, telling him to give it his all. A command that only enrages the fallen commander even more. Hans questions his tone, reminding him who's in charge now. But Raidok scoffs at the idea of serving a mere human. So Hans shows him the artifact, declaring his ownership. Raidok refuses to accept it, still salty about losing the duel. Guess he's a sore loser even in the afterlife. Raidok unleashes his fury on the massive rat monster. But Hans knew he'd have to push the commander to his limit first. The spectral knight roars in defiance, refusing to be a subordinate. So Hans reminds him who's really in charge here. The necklace isn't just an artifact. It's Raidok's life vessel. A realization that finally gets the commander's full attention. Hans lays out his terms, his expression cold and unyielding. Either kill the rat and serve him, or be left to rot in the sewer. Guess that's one way to conduct a job interview. Raidok attacks the beast, still cursing Hans's name. And so the battle between the two monsters begins. Hans reminds the commander that he's the one bound by a contract. He then turns to leave, dropping the artifact as he goes. The threat works perfectly, and Raidok immediately panics. Hans pauses, a knowing look on his face. The commander quickly changes his tune, promising to kill the rat first. But Hans is unimpressed by his new subordinate's arrogance. He decides the commander needs a little reminder of who's in charge. Guess it's time for some negative reinforcement. He throws a strange crystal down into the cavern below. It shatters on impact, releasing a cloud of green smoke. The gas envelops the massive rat, causing it to recoil in agony. Raidok demands to know what Hans has done. Hans explains he just threw a magic stone with a strengthening effect. The monster's eye glows with a new, furious light. He reveals it excites plague monsters, sending Kirrett into a rage. Guess strengthening was a bit of an understatement. The beast slams its fist down with devastating force, and Raidok is caught in the destructive shockwave. The powered-up monster scales the wall, its minions following close behind. But Hans is ready, dismissing the smaller rats with a flick of his wrist. He leaps into the fray, his golden aura flaring to life, and cuts down the first wave with a single effortless swing. Raidok taunts the massive beast, ready for a fight. He is Raidok Schultein, a legendary knight, and he was once known for his unwavering honor. But Hans knows that in this world, honor is a rare commodity. The spectral knight dodges a furious swipe. He stands his ground, ready for the next attack. And Hans reveals his true plan, to break the commander's spirit. A confident smirk spreads across his face. Guess this is his version of team building? He dons a familiar masked helmet and tells Raidok he looks like he's having a rough day. He leaps down from the ledge, joining the fray below. He lands with a quiet confidence, his presence shifting the battle. He then casually asks the spectral knight if he needs a hand, a question that only fuels Raidok's fury, who insists he can handle it alone. Guess his pride is still intact, even in the afterlife. Hans just tells him to do his best, his tone dripping with condescension, but Raidok reminds him they're in the middle of a chat, clearly annoyed by the monster's timing. And just like that, the massive rat lunges forward to attack. It roars, its arm pulsing with the green moss of the plague. Hans watches as the ground erupts in a shower of deadly spikes. But Raidok is already in the air, his own power flaring as he meets the attack. His golden aura flares to life, his focus absolute. He brings his blade down in a blinding flash of light. The monster roars as the attack connects, and retaliates with a furious ground-shaking slam. Raidok lands gracefully, watching the chaos unfold. Hans is surprised the commander could finish it so easily, but he knows Kirrett is a hidden boss for a reason. Guess it's not going down that fast. He watches, his expression unreadable behind the mask, and just as he expected, the monster begins to recover. Its body reforms, the smaller rats swarming back to their master. Raidok declares he will slaughter the beast until it finally dies. His golden aura flares as he prepares to unleash his full power. But from the ledge above, Hans knows the commander is completely wrong. He recalls that Kirrett's attack strategy is deceptively simple. But without knowing its gimmick, the fight is impossible to win. The monster uses its endless supply of minions to recover from any damage, and Raidok's relentless assault is playing right into its hands. In fact, the commander's own special trait is making things worse. A skill that makes him temporarily invincible, but is useless against a boss with infinite health. Guess being overpowered has its drawbacks. As the smaller rats swarm, Kirrett's body begins to regenerate completely. The massive beast lunges forward with a furious roar, and sends the spectral knight crashing to the ground. Raidok can't believe he was brought to his knees by a mere monster. His invincibility has worn off, leaving him completely vulnerable. Guess even ghost knights need a cooldown. But from above, Hans finally makes his move. He brings his blade down in a flash of light, striking the commander with a strange fiery energy. The attack explodes on impact, a brilliant burst of flame. Raidok demands to know what he's doing, but Hans just tells him to watch, because that single strike has temporarily sealed the monster's regeneration. The monster roars, its rage completely unchecked. It lunges forward, ready to tear him apart, but Hans lets out a slow, confident breath. He meets the beast's attack head-on. Kirrett's eyes burn, unable to understand what's happening. Hans stands his ground, his borrowed power flaring. He knows the beast is just trying to buy time to recover, but he's not about to give it that chance. He reminds the monster that he's defeated it countless times before. Guess he's a fan of New Game Plus, and unleashes a devastating wave of pure golden energy. He declares it's time to put an end to this. His focus is absolute, his power at its peak. He brings the blade down in a single fiery arc, slicing through the monster's tough hide. The final blow lands, cleaving the beast in two. With the sewer's ruler defeated, the cavern falls silent, and a single glowing crystal is left in its place. Raidok can only stare in disbelief, asking how it was possible, but Hans just scoffs, saying he expected more from the legendary knight. Guess the performance review isn't going well. He tells the commander he's failed, and prepares to sever their contract for good. Raidok's pride finally shatters, begging Hans to wait. Hans knows the commander's perception of him has finally changed. From above, Lemelin celebrates their hard-won victory, but Hans tells her to hurry down so they can leave. So she just jumps. Guess taking the stairs is overrated. Hans can only watch as she lands with a thud. She sits in the dust, completely dazed from the fall. He wonders why she didn't just throw the bag down first. He tells her to follow, as their work isn't done yet, and so they leave the cavern, their mission complete. Their journey takes them to a desolate, rocky waterway. Hans looks on, confirming he's found what he was looking for. He recalls the harsh trials of Banta Black Ring, and the malice that destroyed so many lives. It all started with the plague-ridden rats, and the contaminated water that spread the disease. So Hans prepares to purify the source himself. He drives a strange pole into the very spot where Kirrett once nested, the same water that poisoned the entire village, and begins setting up his own filtration system. Guess he's a plumber now, too. Lemelin asks what he's planning, recognizing the red firestone. He explains the difference between the explosive red stone and the white sacred stone. The firestone will clear the blockage, and the sacred stone will purify the water. Lemelin looks on, a wave of realization washing over her. She recalls his coldness towards the villagers, and understands he was never ignoring them, but solving the root problem. She eagerly asks if she can help, but Hans gives a simple, firm no. Her enthusiasm instantly deflates into a disappointed pout. Guess she's on bag-holding duty again. He turns away, getting back to the task at hand, and continues setting up the equipment for his cleanup operation. He gets to work securing the purification device. He then looks up at Lemelin, a new plan forming. He asks if she's finally ready to help him out, an offer she accepts with a bright, eager smile. He tells her to deal with the remaining plague rats on her own, a task that immediately brings back all her previous fears. Guess the on-the-job training isn't over yet. She hesitates, her hand clutching her cloak in terror, but she recalls the red-haired warrior's words about acting on her own. She steels her resolve, knowing she can't be abandoned here, and Hans tells her it's time to prove her worth. Hans watches as Lemelin walks off alone. A flicker of surprise crosses his face. She reminds herself that her old life is over. She was the one who chose to follow him, but she knows she can't remain a burden forever. She trusts that he wouldn't ask the impossible of her, and so she faces the remaining monsters alone. Guess it's time for the final exam. She refuses to be abandoned again. She will prove her worth. A strange power awakens within her, and she dives into the fray, her fear replaced by focus. Her blade is a blur of light as she cuts through the remaining rats. Her only thought is to become stronger, to be worthy of his trust. And when the battle is over, the light of a new day greets them. Hans finishes setting up his purification system, the path now clear. He admits this is the first time he's ever let her fight alone. She's exhausted, but she's still standing. He needed to see how she would handle true danger without him, and she moves with a newfound confidence, her fear gone. She may be clumsy, but she's following his instructions to the letter, and for now, Hans decides that's more than enough. She recalls his words about finding the right moment to strike. Her resolve hardens, her blade glowing with a strange new power. She stands alone against the last of the infected swarm. A monster lunges, but this time she doesn't hesitate. She meets its attack with a newfound confidence and cuts a path through the darkness, a blur of silver and light. She catches her breath, the fight taking its toll. But she's forced to dodge as another rat attacks. Guess her backpack is the new bait. Her eyes narrow, her focus absolute. She uses her pack to block the attack, her mind racing. She dodges another attack, her movement still clumsy. Hans finally asks why she's fighting with a heavy bag on. She reminds him he told her to keep it safe. Guess she takes his orders a little too literally. He takes the purification stones from the rope and ties it around her waist, calling it her lifeline. He tells her to hold off the rats while they escape, a task she seems less than thrilled to take on alone. He fires a grappling hook, pulling them both to safety. The hook finds its mark on the edge of the well. He asks why she'd ever think he'd abandon her now. She realizes her master is different from anyone she's ever known, and a new fire burns in her eyes. She dangles above the swarm, ready to hold the line. She fights with everything she has, but the rats just keep coming. She realizes there's no end to the horde. But suddenly, a volley of daggers cuts through the darkness. Guess backup has arrived. The rats screech as the blades find their mark. Lemelin looks up, completely stunned by the sudden assist. Her fear melts away into a bright, grateful smile. And from above, Hans pulls her to safety, his borrowed strength flaring to life. He grits his teeth, channeling his borrowed strength, and hauls her up from the darkness of the well. Lemelin rises from the depths, her ordeal finally over. Her dagger falls to the ground, the battle won. She dangles from the rope, completely spent, and is finally pulled out into the bright light of day. Hans catches her with a steady hand, and for the first time, he offers a genuine smile and a word of praise. He's gained a powerful magic stone and the submission of a very salty spectral knight, and now he wonders just how valuable his new companion will become. Guess she's officially off the intern program. He knows Lemelin is from the White Flower tribe, but decides that's a problem for another day. He places the red firestone on the edge of the well. With all the preparations finally complete, it's time to finish the job. He drops the stone into the darkness of the well. A brilliant light erupts from the depths. Guess that's one way to flush the system. The scene shifts as a figure with white hair casts a complex spell. Their hands move with practiced grace, the magic circle glowing, and the spell activates with a surge of golden power. The cleric realizes her holy magic is completely useless against the plague. A sick villager looks on, his hope beginning to fade. She reports her failure to Commander Kelvin. The commander grits his teeth, feeling utterly powerless, but he refuses to accept defeat, his resolve hardening. Suddenly, a massive geyser of water erupts from the village well. The villagers can only stare as clean water shoots into the sky. They believe it's a divine miracle, a sign of forgiveness. But the cleric notices something else falling from the sky. A rain of very angry, very wet rats. Guess the plumbing problem came with a pest problem. Commander Kelvin orders his men to protect the villagers and exterminate the falling rats. Hans watches from a distance. His plan having worked perfectly, he decides to leave the pest control problem to the knights. Guess that's what they get paid for. He tells Lemelin it's time for them to make their exit. Hans lets out a sigh, his work in the village finally done. He waits in a field of flowers, expecting someone to arrive. But it's Commander Kelvin who finds him, asking what he's doing so far from the village. The commander is clearly annoyed, recalling Hans's flimsy excuse to wander off, but he tries to keep his composure for the sake of diplomacy. While in the background, Lemelin enjoys a rare moment of peace. The commander asks if Hans was the one who made the well erupt. Hans calmly admits that killing the monster was likely the cause. Kelvin is stunned, realizing the beast must have been enormous. He admits he can't even begin to gauge this boy's true strength. He asks Hans to return to the village and help with the aftermath. But Hans says he'd like to finish picking flowers first. Guess priorities are priorities. The commander is left completely speechless by the request. Hans explains that the rats that fled were just the terrified ones. He's confident the knights can handle the remaining pests just fine. By the time they arrive, he assures him it will all be over. He explains he read about a potential cure for the disease, and tells Lemelin to start gathering the flowers immediately. Commander Kelvin admits he'd lost hope when holy magic failed. But if this flower works, he'll have his knights help. Hans smirks, happy to accept the commander's assistance. Guess his plan is working perfectly. They head back to the village as the knights clean up the mess. Kelvin explains they need to see the village chief first. Inside, the chief is clearly unwell, coughing heavily. He invites them in, the green moss visible on his face. The old man greets his unexpected visitors. The chief is stunned, questioning his own age. He then looks at Lemelin, asking if she's the white-haired savior. He explains an old prophecy, that a white-haired figure would arrive and wash away all their suffering. He asks if Lemelin is the one they've been waiting for. Guess white hair is a big deal around here. Hans internally scoffs at the idea, knowing she's from the White Flower tribe but not exactly savior material. After all, he just bought her from a slave market. But the chief grabs her hand, thanking her with tears in his eyes. Lemelin is completely overwhelmed, insisting she's done nothing to deserve this praise. The chief insists that the moment he saw her, he felt saved. Lemelin looks to Hans, completely lost in the conversation. But Hans just asks the old man for a bowl to get started. He reaches into his bag, pulling out the necessary ingredients, and declares he will make a cure for the green moss disease himself. Guess savior is his new part-time job. The recipe requires the flower of ambrosia, which thrives in contaminated water. Mixed with the very water he purified with the sacred stone, he crushes the two ingredients together in the bowl. Lemelin funnels the mixture, realizing this simple method is the cure. And with the elixir in hand, she's finally ready to help the villagers. Hans sits alone, waiting for the next part of his plan to fall into place. He knows a certain trigger should have been activated by now, but it's Lemelin who finds him first, calling out his name. She happily reports that the village has been completely cured of the plague, and she thanks him with a bright, genuine smile. But Hans just brushes it off, saying he doesn't need her thanks. Guess he's allergic to gratitude. Her smile instantly vanishes, replaced by pure confusion. Just then, Commander Kelvin arrives, addressing him as Lord Evan. Hans realizes the commander has had a slight misunderstanding about him. Kelvin praises him as a virtuous hero who knows how to save the weak. Hans sighs, insisting he didn't do it for praise. Kelvin sees this as a sign of humility, calling their meeting a blessing. But Hans's inner thoughts reveal he's not interested in empty words. He's wondering where his reward is for all the trouble he went through. Guess saving a village doesn't pay the bills. He dismisses the thought, turning away from the conversation. Just then, the village chief approaches Lemelin, calling her the savior. He presents a dagger, an heirloom meant for the prophesied hero. The old man looks at her with absolute certainty, declaring that the white-haired savior is finally here. Lemelin is completely flustered, insisting she's not worthy of the title. Hans looks down at the dagger, his mind racing. He recognizes it as the silent true sword, a rare quest reward. He knows its stats aren't great for the effort involved, but decides it's the perfect weapon for Lemelin. So he tells her to accept the gift. She takes the blade, her hand closing around the hilt, and she looks at her new weapon in complete awe. Guess she's officially graduated from hand-me-downs. Hans decides her getting the reward is good enough for him, even if he's the one who did all the actual work. He brushes off her questioning gaze and tells her it's time to go. Their journey continues through a treacherous mountain pass. When the path is blocked, Hans decides to clear it himself. He effortlessly lifts a massive boulder, much to Kelvin's surprise. Guess he doesn't skip arm day. A knight calls out, announcing their destination is finally in sight, and below them lies the sprawling capital city. Welcome to Sitanche, the capital of Pistanze. They're escorted through a grand hall, their footsteps echoing. Each step brings them closer to the heart of the kingdom. Kelvin warns him that the king is on edge due to a new demon threat. But Hans already knows this is all part of the Vanta Black Ring's plan. Kelvin asks if he plans on keeping the helmet on. After all, it's the signature look of the hero who saved Alban Fortress. They're brought before the king in the grand throne room. The ruler of Pistanze looks down with a cold, calculating gaze. Hans kneels, offering a formal greeting to his majesty. Lemelin quickly follows suit, stammering out her own respects. Her red eyes are filled with a nervous uncertainty. The king simply observes them, his expression unreadable. Guess he's not one for small talk. He addresses Hans as Evan and begins to speak of an ancient fortress, a place known as Razgrad, a name that catches Hans by surprise. Hans listens, his expression unreadable behind the mask. The king speaks of a fortress demon named Razgrad, and the hero meant to defeat it. Hans clenches his fist, realizing that Hero is probably dead too. He knows that in his current state, facing that monster would be suicide. A demon of that level is far beyond what a mere mercenary can handle. But the king is confused, pointing out he hasn't even made a request yet. Hans explains he had a feeling that's where the conversation was headed. Guess he's a mind reader now, too. The king clarifies that his request is related, but not a direct order to fight. He simply wants Hans to provide assistance, not to face the demon alone, because another hero has already been chosen, and Hans's role is to be their support. The scene shifts to another part of the Grand Pistanze castle. Inside, the king contemplates the recent events. He stands alone, looking out over his kingdom, but his quiet moment is interrupted by an approaching commander. The king turns, ready to hear his report. Kelvin admits that while Hans calls himself a mercenary, the king understands there's more to the story. He asks if they've properly verified the man's identity. Guess "trust me, bro" isn't official policy. Kelvin admits they only know he's a commoner, but his knowledge of court etiquette suggests a much different past. The king explains he's met countless mercenaries in his time, and they all fall into two categories, the fearful or the rude. He reminds Kelvin that even he couldn't discern the true depth of Hans's skill. The commander can only agree, his head bowed in shame, but the king values his commander's honesty. He knew Hans was different and decided to establish a connection with him. Kelvin asks what will happen if Hans fails to live up to these expectations. The king admits that would be a shame. Guess there's no money-back guarantee on heroes. Elsewhere, Hans is shown to his new quarters by a maid. She offers her assistance, ready to serve the kingdom's new guest. She's also treated to a lavish spread of desserts, a sight that leaves Lemelin completely starstruck. Guess she's never seen a 5-star buffet before. Hans simply warns her not to overdo it. He collapses onto a sofa, finally able to relax, but his mind is already analyzing the king's true intentions. The demon Razgrad's territory is strategically placed on the border, meaning the rival nation of Cheslow will suffer the most damage. Pistanche can then use its hero as an excuse to avoid deploying its own army. Hans recalls a time in the game when he took the king-slaying route, but this time he knows the reward is worth playing along. Lemelin tries to dismiss his dark thoughts, convinced he wouldn't go that far, but their quiet moment is interrupted by an approaching presence. She peeks out, her eyes wide with alarm. She rushes to Hans, her voice filled with concern. She warns him that someone incredibly powerful is coming. Hans knows her tribe is sensitive to auras, but all of Pistanzi's strongest fighters should be at the border. Unless, of course, it's the other hero the king mentioned. A firm step outside their door confirms their arrival. Guess you can't even get room service in peace. And so they wait for their unexpected guest to be revealed. A bandaged hand turns the handle, opening the door. A figure stands silhouetted in the bright doorway, and Hans immediately recognizes the man who's just arrived. It's Ferox Hesleen, another major player from the game. The two stand under the light of a grand chandelier. They finally face each other in the quiet hall. The newcomer asks if he's speaking to the hero, Evan. Hans knows this is the weapon master, Ferox Hesleen. Guess the B team just got a serious upgrade. Ferox introduces himself, confirming he's here on the king's orders. Hans smirks, admitting he's heard of the famous hero. Ferox humbly dismisses the title of hero. He claims he was just lucky, but Hans knows this is part of his character. He recalls that in the game, Ferox's personality was always the same. So Hans introduces himself as Evan and Lemelin as his servant. Guess she's still processing the fancy room. Lemelin offers a quiet, nervous greeting, and Ferox returns the introduction with a charming smile. The scene shifts as Hans recalls what he knows about the hero. In the game, Ferox was a typical growth-type character, famous for having an incredibly slow rate of progression. He knows there's no way Ferox is ready for the demon, so he decides to test him. So they head to the training grounds to size each other up. Hans addresses him formally, but Ferox insists on a more casual approach. Hans agrees, asking the hero to teach him a few things. Ferox just smiles, eager to see what this newcomer can do. Their eyes meet, and the duel begins in a flash. They clash in midair, wooden swords meeting with surprising force. Hans's eyes burn with a familiar intensity. He presses the attack, but Ferox easily parries the blow. The hero is stunned, realizing his opponent is impossibly fast. Hans swings again, but Ferox has already created distance, completely caught off guard. Hans blocks the hero's strike with surprising force, and immediately goes on the offensive. Unleashing a flurry of his own attacks, he taunts the hero, asking if this is all he's got. Guess the welcoming committee is a bit aggressive. He channels the power of the fallen hero, Cadiz, and unleashes a devastating upward slash. His mind flashes back to another time, another battle. His eyes snap open, his power flaring to life. He visualizes the perfect form, the perfect strike, and his gaze hardens, ready to end this little spar. The two warriors clash, their wooden swords a blur. Hans's gaze is sharp, his focus absolute. But Ferox is completely stunned by his opponent's skill, and just like that, the spar comes to an end. Hans lets out a slow, steady breath. Ferox calls a stop to the match, but Hans is the one to concede defeat. Guess they're both trying to be polite. The hero asks him not to hold back next time. But Hans realizes Ferox's stats are far higher than he expected, a level of progress that shouldn't even be possible at this stage. From the sidelines, Lemelin watches the two heroes stand together. A new figure applauds their spar with a slow, deliberate clap. Lemelin watches as the man brings his hands together. He's clearly impressed by Hans's display of skill. Ferox calls out to the man, introducing him as Joseph. He explains that Joseph is a merchant who will be joining their party. Hans immediately recognizes the name, realizing this man is the key to Ferox's impossible growth. He introduces himself as Evan, ready to play along with this new development. Guess the party just got a lot more interesting. The scene shifts to a memory of a gentle, healing light. A story of a young girl with the power to heal the wounded. An ability that was both mysterious and incredibly powerful. Her power drew the attention of many people, but it came at the cost of her own life force. Unable to refuse anyone's plea for help, she slowly faded away. Until one day, she was too weak to even leave her bed. Her brother, Ferox, could only watch over her as she slept. She would wake, asking if he'd risked his life for her again. He would try to heal her with his own strange power, but she would just tell him to stop, worried for his safety. She'd insist she was fine, even as she grew weaker. Guess "I'm fine" is a universal lie, but Ferox made a vow that he would find a way to save her. Under the pale light of a full moon, a lone wagon traveled through the misty night. Joseph explains he'd heard a rumor on his travels of a holy relic that could save Ferox's sister. But the Fountain of Vitalis was a national treasure of Pistanche, and so Ferox became a hero, driven by a single desperate goal. Hans listens, knowing that most would have failed, but Ferox had talent. He became the hero of Pistanche and finally met the king, only to learn he needed a second relic to use the first. Guess it's never that easy. And that second relic was held by the archdemon, Razgrad. So Hans lays out the impossible task: defeat the archdemon, But Ferox admits he's running out of time, and Hans knows it's because of his sister. The hero's hands clench, confirming the painful truth. Hans knows she only has about 3 months left to live. He points out the mission will take twice that long, suggesting Ferox stay by her side. But Ferox is determined to take any chance he can get, no matter how small. Hans can only see it as a lost cause. Guess he's not the optimistic type. The story reveals that Ferox later learns a devastating truth about his sister's condition. It turns out her power was a gift from the very demon he's meant to fight. And from that day forward, his quest for a cure becomes a furious, all-consuming war against demonkind. A future where Ferox screams, blaming that power for her death. Hans knows that saving his sister through ordinary means is impossible. He asks Ferox if he truly believes he can do it, and wonders if he should really be relying on this hero. After all, his only goal is to sit back and relax, while a real hero carries him to the finish line. Guess everyone dreams of being a professional cheerleader. He admits that Ferox is the perfect candidate for the job. But something about the whole situation still feels off. He turns to Ferox, offering a faster, more dangerous path. An offer the hero accepts without a moment's hesitation. Ferox says he doesn't care what the plan is, as long as it leads to the archdemon's defeat. But he draws a firm line at harming the kingdom or its people. Hans assures him that won't be a problem. With that condition met, the hero is completely on board. Hans is pleased, knowing he's secured a powerful ally for his plan. He turns to Lemeline, asking if she senses anything nearby. He knows he can't just suggest a shortcut without raising suspicion, a question that leaves Lemeline completely baffled. So he'll use her natural sensitivity as the perfect excuse. Guess she's the party's official danger detector now. He tells Lemeline to focus, confident she can sense something. She closes her eyes, trying to listen as he instructed. She reports an unfamiliar presence coming from the northeast. And with his excuse secured, Hans tells Joseph to stop the carriage. Ferox questions the sudden decision, trying to stop him. But Hans just hands Lemeline a glowing item and tells her to follow, a command that leaves her completely panicked. Guess she wasn't expecting to be part of the act. And they run off into the misty forest, leaving the others behind. But from a high branch, a mysterious witch watches them go. Hans leads the way, his plan unfolding perfectly. Lemeline struggles to keep up, running through the dark woods. But she trips on a gnarled root and tumbles hard to the forest floor. She groans, dazed from the sudden fall, but as she looks up, she realizes they're not alone. A pair of glowing eyes stares back from the mist, and a massive spectral wolf emerges from the shadows. Guess the local wildlife is a bit aggressive. It lets out a furious howl, its gaze fixed on her, and lunges forward, ready to tear her apart. But its attack is cut short by a sudden, brutal strike. A cloaked figure stands in the mist, a silent guardian of the forest. The spectral wolf's fur shimmers, its blue eyes cold and hungry. Hans identifies the beast as the Mist Runner, confirming his plan is a success. Under the pale light of the full moon, the forest is alive with danger, and soon the Mist Runner's entire pack emerges from the shadows. But Hans has already dispatched one, standing before a terrified young girl. She looks up at her savior, completely stunned by his sudden appearance. He notes her helpless, harmless appearance. But her attention is suddenly drawn to a rustling in the nearby bushes. Lemeline finally arrives, and Hans immediately puts her on guard duty. Guess babysitter is now part of her job description. Lemeline is completely baffled by the command, but Hans is confident she can handle a few stragglers. He draws a new blade from its sheath, ready to see how much stronger he's truly become. He stands as the lone defender against the spectral pack. He recalls a time when he couldn't even face a single Wolfricon. Guess he's come a long way from being Monster Chow. He thinks of all the bosses he's defeated so far, and how he always had to rely on tricks and weaknesses to win. But against these minions, there's no need for a complex strategy. If they won't come to him, he'll gladly bring the fight to them. He plants his feet, ready for the assault. He knows their pattern. They attack, then vanish into the mist. So the solution is simple. Kill them before they can run. He meets the first wolf's lunge with a brutal downward strike. The creature recoils, its form already beginning to dissolve. His expression is cold, his focus absolute. He dodges another attack, moving with a newfound grace. But this time, he doesn't even need a blade, and sends the next wolf flying with a single armored punch. Guess he's been working on his left hook. He stands his ground as the entire pack closes in. He unleashes a golden arc of pure energy, cleaving through the first spectral wolf. The creature dissolves in a flash of shadow. The young girl can only stare, completely stunned. Nearby, Lemeline stands guard over a much smaller, less intimidating wolf. She seems completely unimpressed by the pup's attempt at a growl. Guess not all monsters are created equal, but the pack's true alpha finally makes its presence known. Under the pale light of the full moon, the massive beast steps out from the mist. Its eyes burn with a furious, territorial rage. Hans identifies the alpha as the true boss of this misty forest. He knows he can't fight it in the mist without getting ambushed, so he decides to end this with a single, decisive strike. He leaps forward, diving straight at the massive beast. The wolf lunges to meet him, its spectral jaws wide open. But Hans channels the power of the fallen hero, Gerbier. His entire body is enveloped in a brilliant golden light. He meets the beast's attack with a furious, empowered swing. The impact sends a shockwave of pure energy through the forest. Guess the boss fight is officially starting with a bang. And under the pale moonlight, the clearing falls silent once more. But their quiet moment is interrupted by approaching footsteps. Ferox and Joseph finally arrive, questioning Hans's little detour. And they walk in on a truly horrifying scene. Guess hero doesn't mean good PR. The young girl he just saved now begs for her life. Ferox immediately confronts Hans, reminding him of their mission. He demands to know what he's doing to the helpless girl. His heroic patience has clearly run out, but Hans just wonders why the hero is so upset. He explains this is all part of his plan to buy them time, a response that leaves Ferox completely baffled. Ferox's hand clenches, his anger barely contained. Hans reminds him of his earlier promise to do anything to get there faster. The hero's gaze is cold, his resolve unwavering. But Hans's words hit a nerve, and his composure finally cracks. He demands to know what that has to do with threatening a child. But Hans just grabs his arm, trying to get him to listen. Joseph steps in, trying to calm the furious hero down. He then asks Evan for an explanation that makes a little more sense. And Hans gives a simple, chilling answer. The girl is a witch, a revelation that leaves both men completely stunned. Guess helpless little girl wasn't on her resume. The three men stand over the girl, their expressions grim. She looks up in terror, asking how he could have possibly known. Ferox explains that witches are known to be incredibly evil. His hand rests on his sword as he recalls the dark rumors about them. He questions why Hans would protect her instead of eliminating the threat. But he gives Hans a chance to explain his reasoning. Joseph realizes this witch could be a shortcut to their destination. And Hans confirms that to get there quickly, they need to find the witch's city. He explains this girl will be their ticket inside. Guess hostage negotiation is his new specialty. He then addresses the dangling witch by name, Stella. Stella is completely stunned, asking how he could possibly know her name. But Hans just tells her it's time to be quiet. Her protests are silenced, her eyes wide with terror. Ferox admits he's not convinced, but will trust Hans's plan for now. He demands a full explanation when this is all over, and Hans agrees. Nearby, Lemelin watches the tense exchange. Ferox's gaze remains cold, his trust clearly not yet earned. But Lemelin suddenly senses a new presence approaching. Hans trusts her reaction, knowing something is on its way, and a powerful magical energy tears through the forest. Guess the boss's mom just showed up. A new witch descends in a blur of purple energy. She screams out Stella's name, her eyes glowing with rage. She's one of the 5 great sages of the witch's city. Aisha, the harmonizer of dreams. Her eyes land on Lemelin, calling her by a different name. But her fury is directed at the humans who've captured Stella. Guess the welcome party has arrived. She roars at them for daring to touch their precious one. But Ferox steps forward, declaring he'll handle this new threat. Hans notes the hero's instinct to charge in without a second thought. But he knows that kind of attitude isn't enough to earn his trust after being betrayed by heroes before. He recalls the vow he made to himself, that he would never trust anyone in this world again. As Aisha prepares to unleash a massive fireball, Hans tells Ferox to subdue her, not kill her. The hero agrees with a confident, almost chilling smile. But Aisha has no intention of being subdued, and unleashes a devastating wave of fire. Ferox tells the others to stay back, ready to face the blast alone. Guess he's the designated tank. He stands as the sole defender against the witch's fury. But Hans tells Lemelin to protect Stella, worried about the collateral damage. Stella can only watch, bound and helpless. Hans knows he could handle this fight himself. But if Ferox fails, their entire mission is a bust. So he watches, waiting to see what this hero is really made of. Aisha's gaze is cold, her intent clear. She unleashes a massive fireball, screaming at the vermin below. But Ferox stands his ground, his own power flaring to life. He faces the descending inferno without a hint of fear. Guess he's not afraid of a little sunburn. He drives his blade into the earth, unleashing a wave of energy, and leaps straight into the heart of the fiery blast. He grits his teeth, channeling his own power to meet the flames. and his energy cuts straight through the heart of the inferno. Aisha scoffs, dismissing his foolish attempt to resist. The forest is consumed by a massive, fiery explosion. She lands gracefully, expecting to find nothing but ash, but immediately regrets her overzealous attack. Guess capture alive was more of a suggestion. Ferox emerges from the smoke, admitting her tricks were surprising. He stands completely unharmed, wrapped in a powerful aura. Hans realizes that against this level of power, her magic is useless, and Ferox prepares to show her what a real hero can do. Ferox moves in a blur of purple energy. Aisha scoffs, questioning his death wish. She unleashes a barrage of elemental magic. Her eyes are filled with a cold, murderous intent. The three spells converge on the lone hero, but Ferox's gaze remains calm and focused. He moves with impossible speed, his form a blur. Hans recognizes the hero's ridiculously overpowered trait, an ability called time acceleration. Guess he's got his own personal fast-forward button, a feat that leaves Aisha completely stunned by his speed. He brings his blade down in a flash of brilliant blue light. The attack connects, sending Aisha stumbling back in pain. She questions how a hero of his caliber could possibly be here, but Ferox is already moving in for another lightning-fast strike. He sends her flying, her hat knocked clean from her head. He dismisses her magic as nothing more than cheap tricks, but she roars back, questioning his hypocrisy after what he did to Stella. Ferox is completely baffled, insisting he wasn't the one who hurt the child. Just then, Stella unleashes her own furious power. Guess the helpless little girl act is officially over, and summons a massive fist of fire and rock from the ground. The ground erupts in a massive fiery explosion, and from the flames, a massive fire spirit rises to face Ferox. The hero calmly identifies the new threat, and declares he no longer needs to hold back. Guess the kid gloves are officially off. He leaps forward in a blur of motion. The fire spirit roars, ready to meet his charge. Ferox soars through the air, his blade glowing with a cool blue energy. He meets the massive creature head-on, his power clashing with the inferno. He brings his sword down in a powerful, focused arc, and with a single brilliant strike, he cleaves the fire spirit in two. Aisha can only stare in disbelief at his power, but Ferox's gaze remains cold and steady. He unleashes a new fiery power of his own. Aisha scoffs, refusing to be beaten by a mere human, but Ferox just gives her a confident smile. He dives in for the final blow, his own energy swirling, but Stella unleashes her own power to protect her friend. She forms a complex magical barrier in her hands, and unleashes it with a desperate, furious cry. Guess the kid's not so helpless after all. The shield holds firm, sending Ferox flying backward. Aisha taunts him, confident her barrier is unbreakable, but Ferox just looks on, completely unfazed. He seems intrigued by the absolute defense spell. He plants his feet, channeling his power into a single point, and unleashes a brilliant focused strike. He brings his blade down with impossible force. The barrier cracks under the immense pressure. His eyes burn with a furious, unyielding resolve. And with one final push, the shield shatters into pieces. Guess unbreakable has a pretty short shelf life. He moves through the debris, his path to the witch now clear. Aisha can only stare in disbelief, her confidence completely shattered. Ferox boasts that so far nothing has ever withstood his blade. Under the pale moonlight, the rope Hans used to bind Stella still hangs from a tree, and the young witch finally realizes what it was meant for. She runs to Aisha, her voice filled with terror. The older witch holds her close, promising that she's safe now. But Hans interrupts the reunion, reminding them they're on a tight schedule. Guess he's not a fan of heartfelt moments. Aisha turns to him, her patience gone, demanding to know what he wants. He calmly explains they just need a guide to the witch's city, and adds a chilling warning that non-cooperation is not an option. Aisha can only stare, trying to make sense of this strange man. She notes that his strength seems limitless, but so do his weaknesses. She concludes he might be an even bigger monster than the hero she just fought. She wonders if it's safe to bring them to her city, but knows she has no choice. Hans's cold gaze demands her final answer, and so, Aisha finally agrees to guide them. Guess the hostage negotiation was a success. Under the pale light of a full moon, their journey to the witch's city begins. Hans watches Lemelin sleep, noting how convenient a witch's staff can be, and Aisha leads the way, a silent guide through the misty night. Aisha's gaze is cold, her suspicion growing with every passing moment. She sits on the edge of the wagon, a reluctant guide through the misty woods. She finally turns to Hans, demanding to know why they're going to all this trouble. But Hans just asks if she really needs him to spell it out. She admits she can't understand why two hero-level humans would want to visit her city. And if they're a threat, She needs to be prepared. Guess the welcome mat isn't rolled out just yet. The two of them face off in the quiet, moving carriage, and Hans finally reveals their simple goal. They just need a portal. The answer leaves Aisha and the rest of the party completely stunned. She can't believe they'd risk all this just for a quick travel option. Hans confirms his simple request, seeing no reason to lie. Aisha wonders if she's been worrying for nothing. Convinced these humans couldn't possibly understand her world, she asks if he's truly serious, and he gives a simple, firm yes. She then questions if he's ready for the consequences of entering her city, but she just smirks, seeing him as a fool walking right into her hands. She tells him not to regret his choice, as every decision is his to make. Guess the welcome wagon comes with a warning label, and so their journey continues through the dark, misty woods. But a new devastating truth is revealed about Ferox's quest. Joseph knows the hero is torn between his duty and his sister's life. Joseph points out that Hans's plan seems to benefit everyone, but Hans believes that sweet words always hide lies. Joseph questions his sudden suspicion. Hans wonders how Evan knows so much but knows he'll never get a straight answer. Joseph agrees, seeing him as a man of action, not words. He sees Evan as a mercenary who cares only for efficiency, not honor. A man who is the polar opposite of the hero, Ferox. He knows their conflicting ideals could shatter the entire party. But after weighing the risks, Hans makes his decision. He'll bury his doubts for now and see this through. Joseph questions the hero's certainty, but Ferox's mind is made up. He knows Evan is hiding something, but admits he has secrets of his own. Under the pale light of the full moon, their journey continues. The wagon thunders through the dark, misty woods, but Aisha suddenly orders the coachman to stop. A command that leaves Joseph completely confused. She warns that any further and they'll fall into an abyss. Guess the GPS in this world is a bit dramatic. The carriage lurches to a sudden, violent halt. But Aisha's expression shifts to one of pure shock. As Ferox and Joseph step out to see what lies ahead, Hans questions if they're even in the right place, unable to see through the mist. But Aisha explains that a powerful barrier is blocking their path. She offers to dispel it for them, beginning a complex incantation. A swirl of purple energy gathers at her feet. As she calls upon the power of the moon to light their way, she asks for clear vision, a blessing from nature itself. Guess she's a fan of dramatic entrances. Her eye glows with immense power as the spell takes hold, and the mist is finally pushed back by a wave of purple light. Ferox can only stare, completely stunned by the sight. Aisha announces their arrival at the witch's city, her hair now a vibrant pink. Aisha reveals the name of this hidden sanctuary, Astelwind. Their carriage rolls through the moonlit, misty streets. A grand tower stands at the heart of the city, a beacon of magical power. Inside, a figure with long white hair waits for their arrival. Aisha announces her return to the Great Sage. She explains she brought along some adventurers who wanted an audience. Guess hostages sounded a little too aggressive. They're brought to a grand hall, where Aisha explains their simple request to use the portal. The text introduces the highest of the 6 sages. Eliana, the seer of eternity, who welcomes them with a calm smile. She offers them a cup of a strange purple tea. She explains she's prepared a special tea for her tired guests. The great sage takes a slow, deliberate sip, but Ferox is hesitant, knowing it was brewed by a witch. He and Joseph exchange a wary glance. Hans knows that humans naturally fear being poisoned by witches. Guess hospitality only goes so far, but he picks up his cup without a moment's hesitation. He takes a drink and tells the others it's perfectly fine. The rest of the party can only offer a few stammered agreements. Eliana notes that Evan doesn't seem very suspicious of them, and Hans just asks what there is to be suspicious of. Eliana notes that most humans would fear a witch's tea, but Hans explains he simply chose to trust her. After all, he claims, Aisha trusted them first. Guess he's putting her on the spot. A claim that leaves Aisha stammering in agreement. The great sage smiles, ready to get down to business. She asks if their only goal is truly to use the portal. Before revealing that, unfortunately, it's not available right now. The news sends a jolt of shock through Ferox, and Joseph's expression hardens with concern. Eliana seems amused by their sudden, serious reactions. Eliana clarifies that the portal isn't broken, just temporarily out of service. It's currently under several heavy restrictions. Hans calmly asks her to elaborate. And the reason is the very demon they came here to fight, Razgrad. The name sends a jolt of shock through Ferox and Joseph, while Hans and Lemelin just continue to enjoy their tea. Guess Archdemon is just another Tuesday for them. Hans lets out a long, knowing sigh. The witches are using all their power to shield the city from the demon's influence. meaning the portal will be offline for at least 3 days. A timeline that Hans seems completely unwilling to accept. But Hans knows most of that was a lie, even if it matches the game. And a confident smirk reveals it's all going according to his plan. Guess he's the only one enjoying this plot twist. Under the pale moonlight, the witch's city is a silent, imposing fortress. The party is led through the grand, empty halls. Aisha explains that their rooms have been prepared but are spread out. She asks for their understanding, her expression unreadable. But Hans sees right through her obvious attempt to split them up. He thanks her for the guidance, agreeing to rest for now. She turns to leave, but Hans calls out her name, stopping her in her tracks. He asks for a moment of her time to discuss something later. Aisha is completely baffled by the request. Hans confirms, inviting her to his room for a private chat. Guess Lemelin's mind went somewhere else entirely. The witch is left completely speechless by his forwardness, but the great sage's voice cuts in, ordering her to accept. Aisha agrees to meet him later that night. Her footsteps echo through the empty hall, where another cloaked figure is waiting for her. She stops, sensing the woman's presence. The figure holds a glowing orb addressing Aisha by name, and Aisha's reflection roars back, demanding to know if her sister was even listening. The great sage is scolded by her sister for eavesdropping on the conversation. Guess even powerful witches have family drama. High above, the grand tower of Astelwyn stands against the night sky. Inside, Eliana admits she was worried about an approaching deadline for an offering. She thanks Aisha, implying her arrival with the humans was a timely one. The great sage asks if Aisha knows what must be done next. Aisha confirms that she is well aware of her part to play. With that, the two witches part ways, their plan seemingly set, but Aisha's expression is filled with a deep, unspoken concern. She asks her sister if she truly intends to send them all to a place called Belladonna, and Eliana's cold, unwavering gaze is all the answer she needs. The great sage confirms her sister's fears with a single cold phrase. She tells Aisha to drop the angry expression, reminding her of their grim reality. If they fail, they'll have to sacrifice their own people as offerings. Aisha's hand tightens, unable to accept this terrible choice. Eliana explains their offerings are nearly gone, with no mana-rich life left to sacrifice. If they don't find a solution in 3 days, their entire city will be destroyed. Guess the rent is due, and it's a killer. She asks if Aisha is prepared to bear that responsibility. The younger witch can only flinch, unable to answer the impossible question. Eliana admits this isn't her preferred path, but their options are limited. She points out that Evan choosing Aisha is a sign of trust they can exploit. Eliana tells her sister that this time she needs to act. Aisha agrees, her expression hardening with resolve. She reveals she used her eye of insight to check on their guests, and confirmed that the one called Evan came here with a purpose. She identifies him as the leader of the group, but dismisses a strange, unsettling feeling about him as nothing. Guess her all-seeing eye needs a prescription update. She then gives Aisha her first task for the night. Aisha agrees, her face hidden in shadow. Her hand tightens as she thinks of her duty to her sisters, and her role as one of the witches who protects Astelwind. Her expression hardens as she recalls her past, but his invitation left her completely flustered. Guess even powerful witches get nervous. Hans just watches, his intentions unreadable. Later that night, under the pale light of a chandelier, Aisha recalls a time when she admired her sisters. She was always the youngest, left in their shadow. She believed becoming a sage would earn their respect, so she dedicated her life to studying ancient magic. One day, she found a book with a very strange title, and its contents were not what she expected. A book detailing a very specific interaction between a man and a witch, a memory that leaves Aisha completely flustered. Hans asks what's wrong, and she claims to be thinking of an old legend. A legend about a warrior who receives a witch's first blessing. A blessing that is said to create a world-renowned hero. He claims to have read it in a book, a simple strategy guide. Guess he's a fan of very specific walkthroughs. She questions how such a secret could be in a human book, but she quickly dismisses it as nothing more than a story. So Hans asks what it takes to actually receive this blessing, but outside, unseen eyes are watching their every move. Under the pale moonlight, the witch's city holds its breath. Aisha steels her resolve, ready to do what's necessary for her family. Hans watches her, declaring it's time for them to begin. She asks if he truly wants to know the ritual's secrets. Her eyes are filled with a strange, nervous energy as she calls his name. He simply asks what the ritual entails. She tells him to relax as a strange energy envelops them. She leans in close, telling him to stay still and let her guide him. With a gentle push, she lays him down, promising to handle the rest. Guess this is what they call a hands-on tutorial. She assures him the blessing will be a pleasant experience, But Hans's eyes are wide open, his expression cold and calculating. Outside, a familiar watches the scene unfold from a nearby branch. Its glowing eye serves as a window for the great sage. Eliana admits she was worried, but sees her sister is handling it well. And in another room, the same enchanting magic is at work. She knows that even a hero is nothing more than a puppet in their hands. Ferox is completely ensnared, his will no longer his own. Guess the hero's charm resistance is a little low. Joseph has also fallen victim to the witch's powerful spell. And even Lemelin is cornered with nowhere left to run. Because Eliana's plan is simple. They will all become sacrifices. His helmet sits on a stand, his public identity set aside for now. He admits her attempts were amateurish, but he let her think she was in control, because he needed her to be absolutely convinced she had succeeded. And now that Aisha believes he's under her spell, the great sage's surveillance will finally cease. Guess the peeping Tom has seen enough. Outside, the familiar's glowing eye watches the scene unfold. But its magical light suddenly fades, and the bird takes flight, its mission now complete. Hans knows his gambit has worked perfectly, a declaration that leaves the witch completely baffled. She leans in, confident that her spell has taken hold. But in an instant, the tables are completely turned, and Hans pins the stunned witch to the ground. Her mind races, unable to process what just happened. He tells her he just wants to have a proper conversation. Guess this is his version of breaking the ice. He recalls taking a strange medicine just before she arrived, a special herb that grants complete immunity to status effects. And with a confident smirk, he reveals her magic is useless against him. She insists it's impossible, but he just tells her to be quiet. He then reveals his true purpose. He's come to Astelwind as an emissary of the gods, a claim that leaves the young witch completely stunned. He declares his divine purpose is to eradicate all demons, with the archdemon Razgrad at the top of his list. But Aisha scoffs, dismissing his story as utter nonsense. She questions if a mere human could ever accomplish such a feat. But Hans insists that with him it is entirely possible. A strange light in his eyes gives her a moment of pause. His gaze is filled with an unshakable, almost divine certainty. The two are locked in a tense, silent confrontation, and his unsettling confidence leaves her completely flustered. Guess divine messenger is a pretty good pickup line. He asks if she's finally willing to talk, and she reluctantly agrees. The scene shifts, the tension in the room finally broken, and the two sit down for a much more civilized conversation. Aisha lets out a long, weary sigh, her plan completely ruined. She gets straight to the point, asking about his goal to kill Razgrad, and questions how he could possibly hope to defeat an archdemon. Hans explains that with Ferox on his side, the plan is entirely possible, but he admits that for it to work, he'll need her help. A request that leaves the young witch completely baffled. He explains he chose her because she's the most rational of the witches. Guess a little flattery goes a long way. Aisha is completely baffled by his assessment. He explains she's the only one still willing to stand against the archdemon, a claim that leaves her completely stunned. He knows that most of the other witches have already given up. Even the great sage couldn't find a way to win. After facing Razgrad's power, their will to fight was completely shattered. She demands to know how he could have possibly known their secrets. Guess the city's security isn't as good as she thought. He explains they're all terrified of the archdemon's watchful eyes, so much so that they're too afraid to even take a single step. And with a confident smirk, he declares they've lost their courage to move forward. He explains they've been crushed by their own helplessness, paralyzed by a fear that keeps them from taking the first step. Aisha looks up, asking what he expects them to do. She screams that they've already tried everything they could, but Hans's gaze remains cold and completely unmoved. He admits he doesn't know what they've tried, but he knows it hasn't worked. And that, he says, is the harsh reality of their situation. In the end, they're just turning away from their inevitable destruction. Guess his bedside manner could use some work, but he offers them a new path, a way to save their city forever. He extends his hand, asking her to trust him as she realizes there may finally be a way out. She admits they just wanted to hear that there was hope for them too. She laughs, calling him crazy for asking her to take his hand, but she admits that hearing it from a human feels strangely hopeful. His words may be cold, but they give her a strange sense of warmth. She clarifies that this doesn't mean she trusts him just yet. With her resolve hardened, she asks him to reveal his plan. He calmly explains that they will become the sacrifices she needs. Guess that wasn't in the brochure. She roars back that anyone sacrificed to Razgrad never returns alive. But Hans explains that in the end, only one person needs to die, a statement that leaves the young witch completely stunned. Hans questions her surprise, reminding her of his divine revelation. He reveals his mission is to kill the city's true ruler. Belladonna. Later, Aisha reflects on how strange Hans's actions have been. It's as if he's known everything from the very beginning. He even knows the name of their former great sage, Belladonna, a traitor who handed their city over to the archdemon. But she still finds his claim to be a divine messenger completely absurd. Yet something in his words seems to have reached her. He moves in close, once again turning the tables on the stunned witch. Guess personal space isn't in his vocabulary, a reaction that leaves her completely overwhelmed. The grand tower of Astelwind stands silent against the sky. Inside, a lavish feast has been prepared for the new guests. The party sits down to eat, each one paired with a different witch. Ferox thanks them for their incredible hospitality. He notes that the food itself seems to be enchanted. The great sage. Ileana personally tends to him, much to his surprise. Guess the service here is top-notch. She insists it's her duty, while another witch helps Joseph. The merchant is completely amazed by the magical meal. His companion is identified as the second witch, Milene, and even Lemelin has her own personal attendant for the evening. Her attendant is the third witch, Solena, who compliments Lemelin's table manners. Hans mentally identifies her, noting her polite facade. He also notes the absence of the fourth witch, Camellia, but his attention is fixed on the witch beside him. He glances over at Aisha, who seems less than thrilled. Her annoyed expression is a clear sign. Guess the small talk isn't going well. But Hans knows this is a good thing, a sign her opinion of him is changing. Still, he knows he can't just sit here in silence. If the meal ends without any real conversation, it will prove her charm magic has no effect, and he can already see her suspicion growing. So Hans decides to break the silence, getting Aisha's attention. She's completely caught off guard as he offers a sudden compliment. He praises her earring, then subtly tells her to look ahead. She follows his gaze, completely confused by the strange request, and sees the great sage watching their every move. Guess big sister is a bit of a micromanager. Aisha quickly plays it off, explaining where she got the jewelry. She thanks him for the compliment, promising to return the favor. With the meal finished, Hans asks if she'll show him around the city. He specifies it should be just the two of them, a request Eliana overhears. The great sage agrees with a smile, telling her not to stay out too late. Aisha is left completely stunned by his request. A deep blush spreads across her face, her composure completely gone. She reluctantly agrees, grabbing his arm to lead the way, and pulls him out of the grand dining hall. Guess the date is on. Lemelin can only watch as the two of them leave. Their tour takes them high above the city of Astelwind. They walk along a grand balcony, overlooking the magical landscape. But Aisha finally snaps, demanding to know why he'd say such a thing. Hans just asks if there's a problem, and she stammers that he should have warned her. He then asks if she's really going to claim she wasn't affected by his charm. Aisha is left completely speechless by his question. She can't seem to find the right words. Hans asks what's wrong, but his attention is suddenly drawn elsewhere, because Lemelin has followed them out onto the balcony. Guess she's not a fan of being left out. She explains she just followed her master. Hans knows this doesn't make any sense, because if she were charmed, she would have stayed with Solena. He recalls that her tribe, the Baihua, are known for their immense talent, but they're also incredibly vulnerable to status effects, a weakness that has driven their entire race to the brink of extinction. He knows if Solena finds them, things could go sideways, but Lemelin just asks if their morning training is cancelled. He confirms, telling her to go back to her room. Aisha notes how cold he's being to the young girl, but a new voice cuts in, saying she's heard otherwise. It's Solena who reveals Lemelin told her everything. She's happy to see a human treating her tribe with kindness. Guess Lemelin is a bit of a gossip. Hans's eyes narrow, realizing an unexpected variable has arrived. The third witch now stands before them on the balcony, and their quiet conversation is officially over. Solena asks if he trains with Lemelin often. Hans gives a simple, guarded confirmation. The witch expresses a desire to watch them spar, but Hans knows this is out of character. He wonders if something has changed from the game he remembers. Lemelin looks to her master, caught in the middle. So Hans decides to force the issue, telling her to prepare for a tough match. The scene shifts to a misty training ground, the witch is watching from the sidelines. Aisha questions his strange behavior, but Hans is focused. He asks if Solena has ever failed to charm someone before. Aisha scoffs, declaring her sister is the best at what she does. Guess family pride is a powerful thing. Hans finds the whole situation a little strange. Aisha demands to know if he's implying her sister's charm failed. But Hans just gives a simple, frustrating answer, a response that leaves the witch completely baffled. He explains there's too little information to make a call. Guess he's not one for jumping to conclusions. From the sidelines, Solena prepares for the spar. She stands with a quiet, confident posture, and then leaps forward, ready to intervene. But it's Aisha who grabs his leg, telling him to wait. She holds him back, still demanding answers about the girl. She asks if it would be a problem if Lemelin really isn't under the charm, but Hans declares he's going to confirm it right now. Aisha's eyes narrow, offering to check as well. Hans gives a deadpan look, questioning if that would actually be helpful. She explains she'll just casually ask her sister during the match. After all, she's confident her sister would never suspect her. Guess subtlety is her middle name. Hans agrees, but warns her that one wrong word could put her under suspicion too. She just teases him, asking if he's worried about her. He grits his teeth, reminding her of the danger, but she just tells him to trust her. She smiles, noting that he talks a lot more when he's flustered. He dismisses her concerns as they step onto the misty training grounds. As the witches watch, Lemelin prepares for the spar, but Hans senses something is off. He wonders if it's the charm magic, but decides he needs to confirm it himself. Meanwhile, Lemelin is driven by a new fear, that the witch will take her master away. Guess a little jealousy is a great motivator. Hans tells her to attack when she's ready, and she nervously agrees. She leaps forward with surprising speed, a fact Hans notes as he blocks her strike. He tells her that if she's truly faster, she should be able to dodge his next move. He unleashes a powerful wave of energy from his blade. The two forces collide in a brilliant flash of light, but Lemelin holds her ground, her focus absolute. Lemelin is completely stunned, calling out to her master, but Hans just brings his blade down beside her, unleashing a massive shockwave that shatters the ground. The entire training field is consumed by dust and smoke. Lemelin stands alone in the haze, trying to get her bearings. She realizes her vision is completely blocked by the dust, so she closes her eyes, trying to sense his presence as he taught her. Guess some lessons stick better than others. But he's already right in front of her, moving in a blur. He grabs her head with a firm, steady hand, and uses her as a pivot to swing into his next attack. He covers her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. He tells her to be quiet, his plan in motion, and gives her a strange purple stone to eat. Guess that's his version of a vitamin. He then asks what she's doing here, testing her memory. She answers honestly that they were just training, and Hans realizes his suspicion was correct. She was never charmed. From the sidelines, the two witches watch the spar continue. Aisha gets her sister's attention, ready to probe for answers. She asks if Selena has ever failed to charm someone before. Selena admits she has, but her smile reveals a hidden suspicion. Selena admits her enchantment only seemed to half work on the girl. Aisha tries to reassure her, but Selena knows her spell wasn't strong enough. She reveals that even Lemelin was completely unaffected by her charm. Aisha is surprised, but Selena points out that Lemelin was trying to follow Hans. The fact she broke free is proof the magic failed. Or so Selena thought. She finds the idea of an obsession strong enough to resist her magic intriguing. Guess she's a fan of drama. Back in the present, Hans confirms Lemelin was never under the spell. A realization that makes this whole situation much more complicated. Lemelin can only look on, completely lost in the conversation. But Hans just tells her to forget it, his mind already racing. Lemelin's expression is one of surprise, realizing Hans's assessment was correct. Hans questions why she's aiming her blade at the ground instead of him. She looks up, flustered, unable to explain her hesitation. Hans stands over her, his expression unreadable as she kneels. He asks how she could ever point her blade at her master. Lemelin looks away, her resolve hardening as she refuses. Hans warns her that such hesitation will get her killed against future enemies. He tells her that in her current state, he can't take her with him. Lemelin looks up, her eyes burning with determination, insisting she can do it. Hans looks down at her, challenging her to prove it. Hans stands over Lemelin, who kneels on the misty training ground. Lemelin reflects that more time together has only increased her anxiety. She clutches her dagger, fearing Hans might abandon her someday. To prevent that, she vows to become an indispensable companion. Her face strains with fierce determination, pushing past her limits. Hans watches her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He wonders if she's attempting to mimic Cadiz's unique swordsmanship. Lemelin's eyes glow, determined to prove her worth as a Manhwa clan member. She unleashes her fastest speed, a powerful blue aura surrounding her. Hans is completely stunned by her reckless yet resolute effort. Lemelin's eyes burn with fierce determination, her body crackling with golden energy. The ground shatters as her power erupts, a shockwave of pure force. Hans watches, completely stunned by her sudden, unexpected display of power. He's sent flying backward, caught off guard by the sheer force of her attack. Lemelin presses her advantage, moving with impossible speed, while Hans struggles to recover. She pushes herself even further, demanding more speed from her body. Her focus is absolute, her determination unwavering. Hans grits his teeth, realizing her power is far beyond what he expected. Lemelin lunges, her dagger glowing, as Hans prepares to meet her attack. Their powers collide in a brilliant flash, sending them both flying. Hans and Lemelin clash, their powers erupting in a brilliant golden light. Hans is sent sprawling to the ground, completely caught off guard by her force. He realizes it's not just her speed that has increased, but something more. Hans questions if she can use magic, but Lemelin looks confused, denying it. He presses her, asking what that sudden burst of power was. Lemelin looks down at her dagger, admitting she has no idea what happened. From the sidelines, Selena claps, praising Lemelin's performance. Selena smiles, noting the Baiwa clan's impressive agility. Lemelin, meanwhile, wonders if Hans himself possesses magical talent. Hans finds it strange, as he's never heard of a Baiwa using magic before. But Selena explains that what she saw was definitely magic, however unrefined. She then turns to Hans, offering to confirm it herself. Guess the Divine Messenger story is already making the rounds.